Chapter 1239. Byron is a great wise man. He's the light of this world. He won't do anything that's disadvantageous to us. At the mention of Byron, Moloch seemed to have gone mad all of a sudden. His mouth kept repeating some words that others couldn't understand, as if they were brainwashed by a cult. He even forgot that he was still in a state of extreme danger. Every minute, every second, the dark blue liquid continued to corrode his body. Until the last second before he was completely frozen, he wasn't able to regain his reason. Tears of sorrow and pain were even left in his eyes. Looking at this powerful life form that he once didn't dare to confront head-on, Zhang Qing couldn't help but frown as he muttered to himself. What's going on? Brainwashing, memory, or genetic modification, or some other method. It can actually make an ambitious guy give up his life. As soon as his voice fell, a black shadow suddenly appeared out of thin air, teasing with a smile that wasn't a smile. What, you think it's strange? You're monitoring me? Seeing clearly the face hidden under the hood that was like a skeleton, Zhang Qing immediately became vigilant. Because the one who came was none other than Byron, whom he met not long ago at the edge of the spiritual world. It wasn't any different from the last time they met. The other party still maintained the image of the god of death in Earth's Western mythology. Perhaps the only difference was that he didn't have a scythe in his hand that was used to harvest souls. Monitoring? No, don't misunderstand. I wouldn't do such a lowly thing. I just happened to hear a devout believer call out his name before he died. Byron raised his hand and gently wiped away the tears of the motionless Moloch. What did you do to him? His behavior before he died wasn't like a normal intelligent life form. Zhang Qing raised his eyebrows and questioned. Byron shrugged his shoulders with a smile. Nothing. You've also been a creator. You should know that when a creator creates life, there will often be some commonalities. For example, first of all, the external appearance must conform to one's own aesthetic standards, so much so that it must be 80 to 90% similar to oneself. Secondly, in order to prevent the creation from betraying him one day, the creator would implant some flaws, weaknesses, and things that could be controlled at any time and place. Lastly, and most importantly, all creations must maintain absolute reverence and obedience to the creator. I see. A look of sudden realization appeared on Zhang Qing's face. When they were just born, when they were still very weak, you forcefully instilled too many things into them. For example, his greatness, his intelligence, and his invincibility. Therefore, these people would rather die than betray you. Ha ha ha, you're always so smart. That was right. I ignited the flame of civilization in this world. Naturally, I am their savior and the only god they believe in. As for those overlords who had great power but still acted according to their primitive instincts, they were at most some slightly stronger wild beasts. Do you know? All the life in this world actually came from a mysterious place called the Land of Birth, and I conquered a part of it and modified it to my liking. You can understand that all the intelligent life in this world came from that place. Byron, who never knew what modesty was, directly revealed his trump card. This also meant that the number of cannon fodder he could mobilize at any time was the same as the number of cities in the spiritual world. Moreover, as long as he gave the order, the other party would unswervingly carry it out. As someone who had an in-depth understanding of gods and belief systems, Zhang Qing knew better than anyone how terrifying the power a group of people would erupt when they were branded in their bones. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh slightly. AI, all right. You're really crazy. Tell me, where's the Land of Birth? What, are you interested in that place? Byron's eyes flashed with a trace of playfulness. How could I not be interested? Just like you said, in a certain sense, we are all creators. Although I haven't truly created a race, creating life is something I often do. I really want to know how life, or what is called a soul, is born in the spiritual world, and how they develop subjective consciousness. Zhang Qing didn't try to hide anything, openly stating his goal. The Land of Birth, as early as the first time he encountered the bear monster, he had already heard of this term. Only, he didn't know why, but the bear monster's memories didn't contain the exact location and detailed information of the Land of Birth. Now, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity was placed in front of him. He naturally wouldn't let it go so easily. Ah, a very reasonable request. But the question is, what can you use in exchange? There is no free lunch in this world. Everything has to be obtained with a price. Byron said while raising his hand to crush Moloch, who had turned into a living statue, throwing him into the material universe through the connection point. Because the other side had long been eroded by the deep blue liquid, an extremely terrifying and chaotic scene appeared, but he didn't even have the interest to take a look, nor did he attempt to pass through the connection point and return to the material universe. What do you think I can use in exchange? Zhang Cheng sneered as he asked in return. Of course, it's about the deep blue seawater. From the few words I heard just now, I can already confirm that you have definitely discovered some profound mystery, right? Byron skipped the part about probing each other, simply and crudely raising the conditions of the exchange. Zhang Cheng clearly hesitated, but in the end he nodded. I can give you the latest information I've summarized, but you have to guarantee that you won't tell a third party. Won't tell a third party? Who do you think I'll share this kind of important secret with? Sorry, I just want an insurance. You should know that I had 2 people who were collaborators, competitors, and mortal enemies. They aren't easy to deal with. I don't want to increase the difficulty of the game for myself. Okay, I agree. But among those 2, one of them should be the other you, right? I can even feel the close and contradictory connection between the 2 of you. Truly inconceivable. How in the world did you resist until now? Not try to assimilate the other half. If the 2 become one, no matter who occupies the dominant position, they will become a perfect life form that surpasses the limits. This is a private matter between the 2 of us. I won't trouble you to worry about it. Now, let's begin the exchange. You must know that my time is very precious. No problem. I've already prepared it. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1240. The place of birth, also known as the place of incubation, was the origin of the entire spiritual world's life. According to Byron's description, this world was a huge ring formed around the material universe. Then the place of birth was located at the 4 points of the ring. That's right. It wasn't the only one, but was instead scattered in 4 different places. However, one of them had already been conquered by Byron a long time ago and underwent a series of transformations. At present, it was already completely different from the other 3 places of birth that were still in their original ecological environments. Looking at the endless huge pond in front of him, as well as the things that were continuously decomposing and gathering in the pond, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but sigh slightly. He asked Byron, standing at his side, "You cut off its connection with this world, right?" "Oh, you can feel it?" The latter's tone revealed a trace of surprise. It must be known that in order to ensure that this place of birth didn't completely collapse, he used some shady methods. In particular, through deceiving the entire spiritual world into thinking that this place of birth was still operating normally. Normally speaking, outsiders wouldn't be able to perceive the obscure changes in the depths of the pond. Of course, Zhang Cheng nodded without thinking. You used your own will to replace the will of the world, but you were extremely careful not to break the fragile balance and cycle. If I'm not wrong, the life you created can no longer be considered the original life of the spiritual world, and they won't be completely accepted and recognized by this world. The reason why they weren't treated as intruders completely originated from this huge pond itself. You guessed right. At least you guessed the majority of it. I believe you've also seen that the life of the spiritual world originates from the convergence of spiritual power. When a large amount of spiritual power dissipating in the environment is absorbed, it will reappear from the 4 huge ponds. They carry the remnant consciousness of the previous owner, and here they will unceasingly collide, converge, and merge, and finally give birth to one new life after another. When these ignorant new life forms walk out of the pond, they will undergo several rounds of cruel fighting and elimination. In the end, only the victors have the qualifications to enter the wider world outside. Byron explained as he pointed to the large expanse of empty space in front of him, where new life forms were slaughtering and devouring each other like madmen. Just as he said, These new life forms clearly carried a strong sense of instability, and there weren't many characteristics of intelligence that could be seen. However, as the killing and devouring continued to increase, the madness in some of their eyes would gradually fade and be replaced by fear and hesitation. Soon, these life forms that had gained basic intelligence would quickly escape from the hellish battlefield and flee in all directions. Because they had no memories, they were like newborn babies. They needed to observe and learn for a period of time before they could truly understand themselves and this world. However, most of them would die during their newborns. Only a very small number of them would have the qualifications to survive and become more and more powerful through their wisdom. Interesting. Are you trying to set off a species competition and let your creation completely replace the primitive life in the spiritual world? Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and probed with a faint smile. According to his understanding of the environment and life, in a relatively closed world, a new species would inevitably compete fiercely with the original species and even threaten the survival of the latter. Although this competition could last for a very, very long time and even form a virtuous cycle of mutual progress and development, the final result would inevitably be one side eliminating the other. It could be foreseen that as the number of intelligent life forms continued to increase, they would sooner or later break the monopoly of absolute power held by the overlords. They might even attack the other 3 birthplaces and replace those primitive life forms that were like wild beasts. Haha, you are really making me feel more and more surprised. Do you know? After so many years, you're the first person who can talk to me and understand my thoughts and ideals. That's right. I want to change the spiritual world and brand my own imprint here. Byron opened his mouth and laughed crazily. In his laughter, one could faintly feel the anger accumulated in his heart. After all, as the first ruler of the material universe, arrogance and conceit had already penetrated deep into his soul. He couldn't bear the fact that he was trapped in this world, so he wanted to use this method to carry out his revenge. That's right, he was taking revenge on the entire spiritual world, as well as the life forms that lived in this world. Destruction and death. This was what he wanted to bring to this world. If it were someone else, they might tremble and feel fear after hearing these words. They might even view it as a disaster that had to be struck down. However, Zhang Cheng, who was also dark and evil in his heart, didn't care at all. Instead, he praised with a smile. Leave your own imprint? What great idea and plan. I am very much looking forward to the day when your creations replace the primitive life forms of the spiritual world. When that time comes, an interesting civilization system will rise from the ground. They will give birth to all kinds of ideas, knowledge, and technology. I am very happy that someone like you has finally appeared. Come, let us go to the other 3 birthplaces and experience those crude primitive life forms, as well as the mystery of the birth of the overlords. As he spoke, Byron raised his hand and summoned a huge flying creature that was hovering in the sky. In the spiritual world, although ultra-long distance teleportation wasn't impossible, the consumption of spiritual energy was too shocking. No one would joke around with their own life just to save a bit of time. The mystery of the birth of the overlords? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. Not even in his wildest dreams did he expect that Byron would actually share this secret that concerned the entire spiritual world with him. Hee, don't be so surprised. Believe me, with your intelligence, you will discover this secret sooner or later. All I did was bring the time forward a bit. Moreover, does time have any meaning in this world? As the last word left his mouth, Byron directly pulled Zhang Cheng up and jumped onto the flying creature's back. Then, they set off for the next birthplace with extreme speed. After all, the spiritual world was a huge circular belt that surrounded the material universe. Its enormity was simply not something anyone could estimate through imagination. Even with this creature's extremely special flying method, it would still take a very long time to reach the next birthplace. Apart from Byron, no one knew whether this process would take 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, or millions, or even hundreds of millions of years. Chapter 1241. Just as Zhang Cheng was on his way to the other three places of birth, a beetle-like figure finally left its hiding place at the original site of the city that had completely disappeared. It observed its surroundings with unusual caution, especially the connection point that had yet to be closed. After a full minute, it heaved a sigh of relief and muttered to itself in a voice that only it could hear. The dark blue ocean at the world's border? The first ruler of the material universe that had already disappeared. Byron, I really heard some incredible news. I can't believe that he's already come into contact with the most fundamental and essential mysteries of the mental world in such a short time. Clearly, this insect-like creature was none other than Gru, the last person who had voluntarily given up his identity as a ruler and came to the mental world to seek to surpass his limits. In fact, he had been in this city for quite some time and had even witnessed the disaster's arrival. Fortunately, as a ruler, he had an extremely keen sense of danger. He had hidden himself in advance and was not corroded by the terrifying impact and the omnipresent stagnation power. After confirming that the danger had passed, he left his hiding place and tried to figure out what the dark blue ocean that had been repeatedly mentioned in the conversation was. Why did the seawater have the special attribute of freezing all things? Also, what did the first ruler want to do? How astonishing was the power he possessed? Unfortunately, the city had been destroyed too thoroughly. Apart from the huge vortex in the original obelisk hall at the center, there was basically no debris or ruins left. However, if one wanted to get close to the vortex, they had to take an unimaginable risk. Gru even saw with his own eyes that a flying creature with strong curiosity tried to get closer to investigate. It had just descended to about 1,000 meters when it was captured by an invisible force. No matter how much it struggled or how powerful its mental strength was, it was useless in the end. It gradually lost its ability to move and was swallowed by the huge vortex. Perhaps it was torn to pieces by the terrifying tearing, or perhaps it was sucked into the material universe on the other side and turned into garbage that was stagnant in space. All right, it seems like these things aren't things that I'm qualified to study at the moment. Since those two are also in the mental world, I might as well find them first. As Gru spoke, he carefully avoided the affected areas and left this dangerous area that was about to become a forbidden area. Towards the initiators, he had always held a strong curiosity and a neutral attitude of neither friend nor foe. But now he felt that it was time for him to make some changes and strive to sign an offensive and defensive alliance with the other party. After all, Gru's understanding of this world was still too little. There were too many secrets waiting for him to discover and explore. If a scout could generously share some of these secrets, he would definitely be able to avoid many dangers and take fewer detours. Most importantly, he knew too well how crazy and unscrupulous Zhang Cheng was. Once he was left too far behind, he might not even be able to protect himself. No one would want to die for no reason. At the same time, the initiator and his best friend had escaped far away. They were sitting on the body of a creature that had just died not long ago, devouring the spiritual energy in the air to replenish the energy they had consumed in the past few days. After a while, the corpse completely disappeared. The initiator, who had recovered part of his power, sighed and said in a self-deprecating tone, "First of all, I want to thank you again for saving me, although I know you won't accept it. Secondly, I have to admit that I was too careless this time. I didn't expect Moloch to suddenly attack at that time. Lastly, I want to know why only you came to save me. What about him?" "Him? Are you referring to your other self?" The bespectacled man pursed his lips into a cold smile. "Ah, I understand. He refused to come with you to save me, right?" The initiator wasn't an idiot. He immediately understood his old friend's unspoken words. But for some reason, his emotions were very calm. There wasn't a trace of anger towards his ally for not saving him. It was as if this situation was normal. The bespectacled man sneered in response. "It's good that you know. He's the same as you. He's a complete egoist. Unless it benefits him, he doesn't care about allies. He doesn't even mind giving them a fatal blow when the conditions are good enough. The cooperation between the two of you is at most taking what you need and not relying on each other. Moreover, both of you know very well that one of you has to disappear. Ha ha, how could I not understand? That's why I'm not surprised or angry at all. But I'm very curious. After he saw the deep blue ocean, did his spirit and attitude change in any way? The initiator continued to ask with a laugh. Sorry, I can't tell. The bespectacled man shook his head. But from his impatient appearance, we can infer that he seems to have obtained something that we don't know about. Do you still remember those jumbled memories? I found something that appeared repeatedly in some of those fragments. Oh, what is it? A trace of curiosity flashed through the initiator's eyes. It's enlightenment. Intelligent beings in the spiritual world weren't born out of thin air. They were all enlightened by some kind of power, or perhaps their consciousness, and then gained intelligence. The bespectacled man explained meaningfully. Enlightenment? You mean someone gave them intelligence? There's a creator in this world? How is that possible? The initiator stood up abruptly, his expression constantly changing. A creator, an existence that ordinary beings viewed as gods and omnipotent. However, after becoming a ruler, he understood that the so-called creator wasn't actually that sacred and unattainable. Not to mention the rulers who stood at the peak of the material universe's path of evolution. Just some highly developed civilizations could use all kinds of technology to create special species that they wanted and give them intelligence and life. Apart from that, gods, titans, and other higher beings with technology and power could easily create a large number of intelligent beings. Many savage planets had even been modified by them to give birth to glorious and great civilizations. Therefore, if there really was a creator in the spiritual world who created all the intelligent beings in this world, then it must have unimaginable power. It might even have usurped some of the authority. Chapter 1242. Traveling long distances in a world of whiteness without any reference points would undoubtedly cause one to lose one's sense of direction and sense of time. To be precise, in the first few days, Zhang Cheng was still in the mood to chat with Byron. But after a period of time, he began to fall into an inexplicable state of numbness. It was as if he was indifferent to everything around him and didn't care at all. As time passed, he even forgot the purpose of this trip, forgot his own ambitions and desires, and gradually became one with the entire spiritual world. Who knew how much time had passed? Perhaps it was a few months, a few years, a few hundred years, or even 100 million years, when a strange scene finally appeared on the horizon in front of him. To be precise, it was a boiling pool filled with white steam. At the periphery of the pool, a few monsters with terrifying mental strength were lying down and resting nearby. From time to time, they would emit a frightening pressure. Those strange creatures that had just crawled out of the pool didn't even dare to breathe loudly, fleeing in all directions at the fastest speed, afraid of accidentally waking them up. Without a doubt, these two monsters were none other than the overlords that stood at the peak of evolution in this world. It must be known that the word overlord didn't represent a noun, but a verb through and through. They were powerhouses that stood at the top of the food chain, masters that could destroy everything just by relying on brute force and savagery. Feeling the intense aura of danger assaulting his face, Zhang Cheng's empty heart quickly returned to normal. Squinting his eyes as he asked in an uncertain tone, "Is that the primitive birthplace in front of us? It's guarded by two overlords?" Byron lightly nodded and replied, "That's right. Generally speaking, every birthplace has 2 to 6 overlords stationed there. Generally speaking, they take turns guarding the pool, and once it's attacked, all the overlords nearby will receive an unknown signal and rush over as quickly as possible. If you can cut off the connection between the birthplace and the spiritual world before they return, then they'll give up on coming back and leave as quickly as possible." "Oh, so you're saying that you killed at least 2 overlords in one go back then?" Zhang Cheng's eyes revealed an intense shock. After all, an overlord wasn't an ordinary life form. Even with the dark blue seawater, it was difficult to kill it in a short period of time. On the contrary, he simply could not imagine what the other party was relying on to resist the counterattack of the overlord after he had fallen into madness. "Yes, I killed them. You have to understand that no matter how powerful the overlords are, there's still a bunch of beasts driven by their instincts and desires. As long as they set up traps in advance, killing one or two of them wouldn't be difficult at all. What? Are you interested in the method to kill an overlord? Byron smirked, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. If you're willing to share. Zhang Cheng calmly kicked the ball back to him. He wasn't a fool. He wouldn't show too much urgency at this time. Otherwise, who knew if the other party would take the opportunity to set some harsh conditions? All right. I've been in a good mood recently. Since you want to know, I'll tell you for free. In fact, there was a limit to the number of overlords in this world. On average, each birthplace could evolve up to 6 overlords. For birthplaces meant that there were 20 overlords. However, after one of them was conquered and modified by me, there were only 12 overlords left in this world. Almost every one of them had a fixed territory and hunting range. Their original function was like a scavenger, eliminating the weaker life forms and allowing large amounts of spiritual energy to flow back to their birthplace. This ensured that this cycle of searching for fate would continue forever. However, it's a pity that I broke this fragile cycle. As the number of intelligent life forms increased, the other 3 birthplaces were unable to create enough new life forms for a long time. Therefore, just like what you mentioned before, when the number of intelligent life forms completely exceeds the number of primitive life forms, the power of civilization will be maximized. When that time comes, whether it's the overlords or the ignorant beasts, they won't be able to escape the fate of extinction. Moreover, the overlords themselves are like the rulers of the physical universe. They represent a part of the consciousness and authority of the spiritual world. I'm looking forward to seeing what they will do when they realize that they're about to be eliminated. As he spoke, Byron once again looked at the overlords who were resting with their eyes closed in the distance. As one of the very few, or even the only one, who had directly clashed with an overlord, he was very clear about the power that the overlords possessed. There were some things that he still felt lingering fear when he recalled them. Zhang Qing undoubtedly noticed this and probed with a faint smile. What about now? What do we do now? Do we just stand here and watch from afar? No, of course not. Byron hurriedly shook his head. I know that you've been secretly researching the secrets of the overlords. You even removed an organ from an overlord's corpse and transplanted it into your own body. So, what are you trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that perhaps it's time to share some real secrets with you to confirm if you have the same goals and expectations as me. You must know that I've always been alone, and almost no one can understand my thoughts and ideals. However, I suddenly realized that you're a good candidate. Come, follow me. You'll witness the entire process of an overlord's birth. Remember, keep quiet and don't make a single sound. Also, don't have any strong emotional fluctuations. As Byron spoke, he took out a handful of unknown powder from his large, tattered robe and threw it into the air. In an instant, the powder flickered with light and quickly enveloped an area of several kilometers in front of them. Any creature that came into contact with the glittering powder would instantly fall into a sluggish state, as if they had lost all connection with their surroundings. Just like that, he swaggered through the 2 overlords without any signs of waking up. After the 2 entered the pool filled with white steam, they quickly discovered that in the deepest part of the pool, there were a few eggs that were completely different from normal creatures. Some of them were colorless and transparent, while others were in bright colors like red, yellow, blue, and green. They were as interesting and beautiful as Easter eggs. Byron pointed at the closest egg and pretended to be mysterious as he blinked his eyes and said, "Do you know what these eggs are? What are they?" Zhang Cheng asked cooperatively. Chapter 1243. They're the embryos of the Overlord, shells that have yet to be infused with a soul. Byron bent down and lightly tapped the surface of the eggshell with his finger. The egg immediately trembled as a response. Please explain in more detail. Zhang Cheng wouldn't miss out on such an important piece of information, so he took the initiative to ask. This was because he could sense that within these few eggs, although there were signs of life, there wasn't the slightest trace of a soul or subjective consciousness. In other words, rather than being embryos, it was better to compare them to unfertilized eggs. Before a soul or consciousness was infused, they were in a relatively static state. They wouldn't undergo any qualitative changes, nor would they continue to grow. Instead, they would maintain their primitive state and silently wait. From a biological point of view, this was absolutely abnormal, and it didn't conform to the basic laws of life evolution. A thirst and greed for the unknown. I like the look in your eyes. As you can see, there's a limit to the number of overlords. In other words, when this world was first born, it formed its own basic order and cycle, just like the physical universe. Byron sighed with a smile, but he quickly continued to explain. As you can see, there's a limit to the number of overlords. So these eggs, or called embryos, are actually a type of reserve. Zhang Cheng seemed to have thought of something, and an expression of seeming to understand appeared on his face. That's right. These embryos are a type of reserve. If you kill an overlord born in this place of birth, then their remnant consciousness and soul will return here and enter one of the eggs. This egg that has been infused with a soul will develop in an extremely short period of time. Therefore, to a certain extent, overlords were actually unkillable, even though their memories would be wiped clean after each death. However, the soul is still the same soul, and the consciousness is still the same consciousness. Byron explained meaningfully. Then where did the overlord of the place of birth go after you modified it? Zhang Cheng subconsciously furrowed his brows and straightforwardly raised the question he was most concerned about. Since the overlords were bound to the place of birth, there should still be an overlord in the place of birth that had been modified. Unless the place of birth was destroyed, they could revive again and again. I'm very happy that you finally asked the crucial question. That's right. In the place I'm modified, the overlord didn't die. He only lost his connection with the world, so he had no choice but to enter a long period of hibernation. If you're willing to pay a little price, I will be happy to give them to you. As he spoke, Byron fished out a golden oval egg from somewhere on his body. This is... Zhang Cheng's eyes widened instantly. He did not hide the excitement and surprise in his heart at all. This was because he could clearly feel that this small thing contained an extremely large amount of spiritual energy. Byron smiled proudly. You guessed right. This was the overlord that had yet to be hatched and would never be hatched. Hard to imagine, isn't it? Such a powerful life form was just a small toy at the beginning. Now, I can crush it with just a flick of my finger. What I have to pay to get it? Zhang Cheng went straight to the point, obviously not intending to talk too much nonsense. It's simple. Continue to delve deeper into the mysteries of the dark blue liquid and assist me in completing my plan. Byron proposed his conditions without hesitation. Zhang Cheng pretended to hesitate for a few seconds before quickly nodding in agreement. All right, but you have to give me enough time, as well as the corresponding manpower and material resources. Research has always been accompanied by danger and large consumption. I'm not sure if you can make that kind of determination. Don't worry. I don't care about consumption. As long as I can obtain a satisfactory result, I won't hesitate to destroy this world. After all, aren't low-level life forms just for us higher-level life forms to conduct research and pass the time? To be able to sacrifice themselves for a grand experiment, they should feel honored. That makes sense. It seems that in this aspect, the two of us hold the same view. Just like how kindness would be attracted to kindness, evil would also be attracted to evil. No one knew what these two lunatics, whose hearts were filled with dark and evil aura, would bring to the already chaotic spiritual world. But one thing was certain, and that was that the intelligent life forms gathered in the cities were about to face a calamity of extinction. Following the agreement between Zhang Cheng and Byron, several cities disappeared into thin air in a very short period of time. There were also some that turned into ruins or deadlands. No scruples. Absolutely unbridled. There wasn't the slightest bit of pity. Zhang Cheng used destruction and death to once again perform his best play in the spiritual world. Because there was no concealment, the news quickly spread through the cities established by intelligent life forms. It was like a plague, causing everyone to feel panic and fear. It had to be known that even if an overlord attacked, it wouldn't be able to destroy a city in an instant, nor would it destroy all of its residents. At the very least, there would be a few survivors who would escape. But this time, every city that was attacked didn't have a single survivor. Not even a trace of life could be found. What was even more frightening was that there would often be some terrifying power left in the surroundings of these cities. Even the slightest bit of it would make it impossible for one to leave alive. When this news reached the initiator's ears, his face immediately darkened as he said to his old friend, "This is his doing. I can feel it. That damned lunatic is starting to do some dangerous experiments again." "Oh, it's really him?" The man gently pushed up his glasses, a trace of surprise appearing on his calm face. "Of course it's him. Who else could it be other than him? So dark, so evil, so cruel, so unscrupulous in order to achieve his goals. But I don't think I have the right to criticize him. After all, if I had such a good opportunity, I definitely wouldn't let it go so easily." The initiator sighed helplessly. "Unbelievable. He's actually using a large-scale massacre to test the characteristics and mysteries of the dark blue liquid. I believe that he's already obtained a lot of precious information through this massacre. I suggest that we get in touch with him privately and see if we can work together. As for the unhappiness from before, let's just let it go. Cooperation? Ha ha ha. Are you joking? I guarantee that if we go find him now, he'll definitely sell us out to another collaborator. Don't forget, we're still enemies, competitors." Chapter 1244. Tens of thousands of intelligent life forms imprisoned in transparent jars were densely packed in the huge, sealed laboratory. A small number of them were willing to give up everything, but most of them had no choice but to submit to powerful forces. But now this was no longer important because their lives had entered the countdown. The only difference was that some would die faster, some would die slower, some would die in incomparable pain, and some would die more comfortably. As the initiator of this massive experiment, Zhang Cheng had long since lost count of how many lives he had directly or indirectly killed. He also couldn't remember how many cities had been reduced to ashes with a single command. But he didn't care at all. He only cared about one thing, and that was the meaning of the existence of the deep blue ocean, as well as the true purpose of the seawater. As the scale of the experiment grew larger, more areas were affected. In order to maintain its cycle and stability, the spiritual world had begun to produce things similar to human white blood cells, launching a frenzied attack on the laboratory. Especially recently, two of the overlords had joined the attack. If Byron hadn't made sufficient preparations beforehand, perhaps all of the equipment and experimental subjects would have been destroyed. But even so, Zhang Cheng could feel the hostility and rejection of the entire world toward him. It was obvious that he had violated a taboo that he was absolutely not allowed to touch. Listening to the incessant cries of agony, he casually crushed the jar closest to him and asked without turning his head, "How long can the defense outside last?" A life form with a human appearance, but no face bowed and respectfully replied, "At most 10 cycles." 10 cycles? Zhang Cheng subconsciously frowned. Since the spiritual world had no sun, moon, or stars that could be used as a reference to observe the passage of time, most cities would build a huge obelisk. Every time the top of the obelisk lit up, it was the beginning of a cycle. Then, the light would slowly descend, and when it reached the lowest point, it would bounce back up. When it returned to the top again, it would signify the end of the cycle. Because the height of the obelisks was different, the cycle time was also very different. The time for the obelisk built outside the laboratory to cycle once was equivalent to a month on Earth. In other words, it would take at most 10 months for the seemingly solid defense to completely collapse, and this was under the premise that the attack power would not continue to increase. Perhaps 10 months was a rather long period of time for the short-lived humans on Earth, but for the spiritual world that could easily be counted in billions, 10 months was just the blink of an eye. Most of the life forms that were born and grew up here did not even have a sense of time. Unless they were killed or their spiritual energy was exhausted, they would never die. That's right, 10 cycles. In addition, Master wants me to inform you that it's best to find the answer he wants within 10 cycles, or else. The faceless man deliberately, not finishing his sentence. After Zhang Cheng heard this, he didn't show any anger or anger. He just responded with a smile. An ultimatum? I know of it. According to the plan, deliver that item to all the remaining cities for me. All. Even though the faceless man had long been accustomed to the other party's cruelty, he was still frightened by this crazy order and trembled slightly. Yes. All. Why? Do you have any questions? Zhang Cheng pursed his lips, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. The faceless hurriedly shook his head. No, of course not. Master's orders are to be unconditionally obeyed. No matter what your orders are, my men and I will carry them out 100%. Very good. Zhang Cheng nodded with satisfaction. Then what are you waiting for? Hurry up and act. Remember, don't let go of any city. There are some things that can only be obtained by sacrificing an endless amount of fresh lives. As you wish. The faceless bowed deeply, then turned around and quickly disappeared through the exit leading to the outside world. About a few minutes later, he arrived at a place less than 2 hours away from the experimental site. He didn't even leave the defensive perimeter of the cave. Facing the shadow, standing in the darkness, he respectfully reported, Master, I've already conveyed your message to him in full. His response, the shadow turned around, revealing a skeleton-like shriveled body and face. He was none other than the culprit behind all these changes, the first ruler born in the material universe, Byron. He asked me to release that thing in all the cities. The faceless cautiously replied, All. Byron's tone was full of surprise. Although he didn't care about the life and civilization he created with his own hands, he didn't expect that under the other's calm surface, there was actually such a crazy idea. Yes, All. Please forgive me for speaking bluntly, but he is too bold, too dangerous. You shouldn't allow him to carry out such large-scale destruction and destruction. While saying these words, the faceless didn't hide the fear in his heart. That's right. He, who had never understood fear, felt fear for the first time from another intelligent life. Unfortunately, Byron not only didn't accept it, but instead sneered and asked, When did you have the qualifications to make decisions for me? Don't forget, you are just a tool, an executor who doesn't know how to think. Do as he says. I'd like to see what he can do in the end. I'm very sorry. I'll immediately carry it out. The faceless was obviously frightened by the harsh tone. In a short while, he fled without a trace. Watching the servant he created gradually go away, Byron opened his mouth and muttered to himself in a voice only he could hear. All the cities where intelligent life gather at once. You are really more daring than I thought. Seeing this, I'll let you do it. In any case, I've already decided to leave, so what happens to the spiritual world in the future, it has nothing to do with me. In any case, as long as that transformed place of birth still exists, intelligent life will continue to be born, and sooner or later, it will replace the primitive life. This world has already been branded by me, and no one can erase it. As soon as his voice fell, his body once again turned into dust and disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only the remnants of strange energy waves in the surrounding environment. Chapter 1245. Faceless One. A group of servants created by Byron to assist him in carrying out some large-scale operations. No one knew how many of them there were, and no one knew whether each of them had an independent consciousness or was controlled by a powerful consciousness. But one thing was certain. Whenever they began to appear on a large scale, it meant that a major disaster or revolution was about to happen. In just a short span of 3 months, these Faceless One had hidden a sealed black box in the center of all the cities. When the last box was placed, Zhang Cheng finally started his crazy plan. Almost at the same time, the seals of all the boxes were opened, and a dark blue gas-liquid mixture spread out in all directions at an unimaginable speed. Wherever it touched or swallowed, it would become a stagnant world. Life would become a living statue, and the environment and buildings created through spiritual force would stop aging and decay, maintaining their current state forever. This silent world was so terrifying that the residents in the city, who wanted to detect it began to throw away everything in their hands and madly run out of the city. There were also some who did not hesitate to expend a large amount of mental energy to fly, teleport, and other means to run as far as possible. But when they fled to the city walls, they were horrified to find that the surface of the walls had been densely covered with sealing runes. Whether it was the sky, the ground, or the underground, they were unable to rush out in a short time. In this world, there was nothing more cruel, more painful, and more desperate than helplessly watching death come. But Zhang Cheng brought all this to hundreds of millions of intelligent life forms. At the same time, a lot of data and phenomena were recorded. Is this what you want? The extinction of life and civilization? Faceless One stared at the scene of the destruction of the city on the screen and asked, "No, what I want is not the extinction of life and civilization, but to collect enough feedback data at once. Do you know? There may be countless deceptions and lies in this world, but there is one thing that will never lie, and that is the last reaction of life before death. No matter if they were good, evil, order, or chaos, they would all reveal the truest side of their hearts before they died. Therefore, the data collected at this time may have a certain deviation, but it will never be false." With that, Zhang Cheng pulled out a white translucent strip from a strange instrument. What was stored here was nothing else but the spiritual feedback of thousands of lives in the city before death. "I don't understand. What is the meaning of collecting this feedback?" Faceless One straightforwardly continued to ask. Zhang Cheng stuffed this huge memory into his forehead, and while deciphering it, he casually explained, "Of course it is meaningful. The dark blue ocean is unobservable, and it is this unobservability that makes it a fault that separates the two worlds. If you want to figure out the mystery of the liquid, there is no such thing as skill. The only way is to summarize it with a huge amount of experimental data." Faceless One obviously held a different opinion and took the initiative to refute, but except for the solution of civilization and life, I don't think I saw any meaningful data. That's because you don't have a pair of eyes. You know, discovery is the simplest thing in the world, but it is also the most difficult thing. Look at these intense emotions at the moment of stagnation. Don't you notice that each one is slightly different? Zhang Cheng separately presented dozens of memories in the form of images one by one. This is, under Zhang Cheng's reminder, Faceless One finally found the abnormality, and his whole body uncontrollably trembled slightly. Just as he was about to say something, but before he could say anything, a black shadow suddenly appeared and directly twisted Faceless One's head, crushing his spirit and soul. After doing all this, the black shadow revealed its true body and said with a slightly reproachful tone, "You shouldn't have revealed this secret in front of a tool." "Oh, I'm sorry, this can't be blamed on me. You should have seen it. It was him who kept asking." Zhang Cheng pursed his lips, revealing a meaningful smile. There was no need to ask. He definitely did it on purpose, wanting to use another hand to eradicate this annoying guy. No one would like to have a guy always pointing at them, often standing up and singing a different tune. Especially someone like Zhang Cheng, who was accustomed to acting arbitrarily, an evil madman who simply didn't accept any questioning. "Oh, well, it's just a tool. Although it's very useful, it can never be compared with you." Byron didn't seem to intend to pursue responsibility. Instead, he raised his head and stared at the final feedback fragments, his whole person sinking into contemplation. After no less than 10 minutes, he raised his head and asked with an uncertain tone, "At the moment of stagnation, the spirit of these lives, without exception, showed a strong resonance, and even connected together, right?" Zhang Cheng nodded seriously. "That's right. Your observation is very sharp. Look at this memory, and then look at this one. They're separated by a very long distance, but they can feel each other's consciousness. Think about it. If you establish a huge consciousness that can cross space and dimensions, and even break the barrier between two worlds, and become the controller of all life's consciousness, how huge and invincible would that be? You must know, even the celestial bodies formed in the universe actually have a weak consciousness. Oh, this is a crazy idea, but I like it. But the problem is, how can we use that endless deep blue ocean to achieve such a grand goal? After all, right now, we can't even connect with that liquid. It's very simple. Do you still remember how you killed the Overlord? Now, we can use that liquid to create a new Overlord and let it sound the death knell of the entire spiritual world. When the time comes, with the huge spiritual impact produced by the destruction of the world, we can go deep into the depths of the deep blue ocean and find its true core. I believe you won't mind me destroying this world, right? Objection? No, of course not. I will be honored to join hands with you to achieve this grand goal. Then, happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1246. What was the simplest and easiest way to break through a sturdy fortress? The answer was, of course, to attack from the inside. As the white blood cells of the spiritual world, the limited number of overlords had always been responsible for eliminating potential threats. Whether it was Zhang Cheng's crazy experiments or Byron's invasion of the birthplaces, they had all encountered direct attacks from the overlords. But now, because one of the 4 birthplaces had been cut off in the outside world, the overlords that should have been revived had been in a dormant state, silently waiting for the order to activate them. Right now, they were like a blank sheet of paper that had completely lost their previous memories. Next, they only needed to carry out a series of complex experiments and modifications to become the veritable terminators of this world. Of course, before that, there were still a few small problems that needed to be tackled. But for these 2 lunatics who had no considerations, these problems were only insignificant obstacles on the road ahead. Under their joint efforts, it didn't take long for them to complete the first, which was also their first work. Looking at the creature that was crawling on the ground and emitting a faint dark purple radiance, Zhang Qing asked in an uncertain tone, "What do you think is the probability of us being directly attacked if we awaken it now?" "What? You don't have confidence in your technology?" Byron spread out his hands and asked with a look of indifference. From the flickering excitement and expectation in his eyes, it wasn't hard to tell that he was extremely satisfied with this creation. "No, of course not." Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. "I'm just a little worried. You have to understand that no matter how perfect a creation is, there will always be some kind of invisible flaw. Sometimes these flaws will be hidden forever, but there are also some flaws that will suddenly erupt, causing the originally perfect creation to become a death sentence for the creator. I don't want to be killed by my own creation at all, no matter how powerful or perfect it is." "Haha, unbelievable. This is a little different from the madness you showed before." Byron laughed and teased. As the first ruler of the physical universe, he had seen all kinds of life forms, but he had never seen someone who displayed such fanaticism and obsession in the field of research and exploration. But what was more interesting was that after the research was over, all the fanaticism and obsession disappeared without a trace, replaced by caution and extreme rationality. He didn't understand how this interesting partner in front of him was able to combine 2 contradictory personalities. Not only did he not make it a flaw, but he also took into account the strengths of both. Do you think it's strange? In my hometown, people often say that everything in the world is made up of contradictions. Think about the lives you've seen in the material world. Have some of them been extremely cowardly for most of their lives, but burst out unprecedented courage and strength at the critical moment? In my opinion, conflict means change, and change means uncertainty. Only when the future is full of uncertainty will life become interesting, Zhang Cheng said as he inserted a compiled memory deep into the creature's soul. In an instant, all of a sudden, the motionless fellow began to tremble violently as if he was having a seizure. His fearsome mental power even crushed everything around him. In the next second, boom, everything, including the experimental equipment, was reduced to nothingness after a loud bang. There was no technique involved. There were also no energy fluctuations. There was only the purest form of mental power. When the life form opened its eyes, the silver cross-shaped star in its pupils flickered unceasingly. Everything around it seemed to have become frozen and stagnant. An overlord, a powerful life form that stood at the peak of evolution in this world. It had finally awakened. It first swept its gaze full of hostility towards the two creators standing not far away. Soon, it let out a disdainful snort and rushed out with its nimble limbs. It was like a purple lightning bolt. In less than a second, it disappeared from sight. We succeeded? Byron asked with some astonishment. In fact, he'd already silently held a bottle of dark blue liquid in his hand, preparing to deal with the crazy attack that could appear at any time. This was because he knew better than anyone that an overlord would absolutely not be controlled by anyone, let alone submit to anyone. Especially that flash of contempt, which fully demonstrated the invincibility of an overlord's mental power. Even Byron, who had successfully killed several overlords, had only borrowed the power of the dark blue liquid. If it had been a direct confrontation, he would have been the one to lose in the end. Ah, that's right. We've succeeded. The seeds of destruction have been planted. The next step is to patiently wait for the arrival of the harvest. It will bring destruction to this world, and from this destruction, we will obtain secrets that surpass everything. Also, I'm very curious. After you return to the material universe, what exactly do you plan to do? Conquer and destroy the remaining overlords and re-establish your supreme dictatorship? Zhang Cheng turned around and asked with interest. Byron replied meaningfully, "No, that's not it. I plan to end the so-called infinite cycle and recreate a new universe. A universe that fuses everything together. A universe that can surpass the limits of overlords." Destroy the cycle? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. After all, this enormous cycle supported time, space, dimensions, and many other factors, especially the network-like parallel universes. Once these things were destroyed, it meant that the history and future of the entire universe would cease to exist. What? Are you afraid? Byron's skeletal face revealed a smile that wasn't a smile. Afraid? Why should I be afraid? Didn't you hear what I said just now? I like an uncertain future, Zhang Cheng retorted, not backing down at all. Really? You don't miss your past, the good times and your memories, and your former friends and lovers? From what I know, more than 90% of overlords like to frequently return to the past, to return to their home planet, to savor it and call it life. Please don't compare me to those trash. I'm a surpasser. Everything in the past can't compare to the present and future in my eyes. The past is the past, a burden destined to be abandoned. If you carry too many of these things, you definitely won't be able to walk far on the long and arduous path. Chapter 1247. Some people said that memory was a precious treasure. It could make you feel happiness, sadness, pain, despair, and even make everyone become their unique self. But in Zhang Cheng's eyes, memory was memory. Sometimes it would become a motivation to move forward, and sometimes it would become a self-deceiving, self-drugging drug. This had nothing to do with intelligence or stupidity, but the deep influence of memory on one's character. Normally speaking, no one would want to abandon their past because that meant abandoning their present self, and they might become a completely different person. But Zhang Cheng, who had always been a mix of madness and rationality, did not mind changing his personality a little, because his heart had long become abnormally firm after experiencing countless trials. No matter how he changed, he would never give up on the ultimate goal that surpassed everything. In fact, the memories of his past as a mortal would often affect his plans and choices. For example, when he destroyed a civilization, the scene of Earth's final destruction would often appear in his mind, and he would recall the women he had spent a long time with, and even had intimate relations with. Even though these irrational impulses were all suppressed by absolute coldness, they were no longer as simple as memories, but a heavy burden that could lead to failure. Without a doubt, Byron was keenly aware of this. He opened his mouth and laughed heartily as he sighed. "Oh, no, you lunatic. You actually want to abandon your past memories. How inconceivable. Are you serious?" "Why not?" Zhang Cheng asked expressionlessly. "Do you care about your past? If you really care, you won't try to break the cycle of the physical universe. Once the cycle is broken, all time will cease to exist, especially the time before you became a ruler. Everything will disappear from your memory. You're right. Once the cycle is broken, all the nodes on the parallel network will disappear forever, including your past and mine. Byron did not try to deny this, and instead nodded happily. But soon after, he explained, "But don't forget, we're not just breaking the cycle this time, but also connecting the spiritual world and the physical universe after the destruction. No one knows what will happen after the two fuse, but I can be sure that when the time comes, becoming a ruler will not be the end of the path of evolution. Yes, we're about to break the ceiling with our own hands. But before that, I hope you can do me a small favor." Zhang Cheng stuck one hand into his body and pulled out the organ he plucked from the Overlord's corpse. Unlike its initial appearance, the surface of this organ was now covered in green vines, and a small tree that was only 2 fingers tall had already taken root and sprouted. It was obvious that this was the heart of the Tree of Chaos, and it constantly emitted a dark and chaotic aura. "A small favor? Don't tell me you want it." Byron had no doubt guessed something, and he immediately became excited. "That's right. I hope you can help me complete the fusion with my other self. To be precise, I want to devour him. He has a soul fragment that belongs to me, and I want to fuse this soul fragment into the depths of his soul. I believe this shouldn't be difficult for you." Zhang Cheng did not beat around the bush as he made his request. In order to reduce the risk and complete the final transcendence, he needed a powerful force as support. Devouring the initiators was the method with the lowest risk and the greatest results in a short period of time. As for the hidden dangers, he could no longer care about them. "It's my honor. I've been looking forward to this for a long time." With that, Byron disappeared from where he stood, leaving behind a large expanse of black mist. After confirming that Byron had left, Zhang Cheng let out a sigh of relief. He muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "It's time for the game of dominance to end. Dear initiators, I've won." At the same time, far away in the outskirts of a city that had fallen into a state of stagnation, the initiators had yet to realize that danger had descended upon them. They were leading their old friend and new ally, Gru, to carefully gather information and specimens, afraid that they would become half-dead if they were not careful. One had to know that not long ago, they had experienced a similar disaster. Fortunately, they had been very close to the city gates and had rushed out before the membrane had completely surrounded them. Otherwise, they would have been living statues by now. Gru could feel the lingering fear and despair in the eyes of the living corpses. He couldn't help but question, "Are you sure this is his doing? Why would he do something like this?" Experiment, collecting the necessary information. The bespectacled man answered without hesitation, "But this is too crazy. Just to collect some feedback, he destroyed all traces of civilization in this world." Gru's voice was filled with distrust. "What else? Believe me, you don't understand him at all. At least, you don't understand the real him." The initiators pursed their lips and revealed a mocking smile. Just as they were about to say something, their sharp sixth sense suddenly sent them a danger signal. They retreated more than 10 meters to the left. However, before they could steady themselves, they realized that a skinny hand had pierced through their heart. To be exact, it had pierced through their soul. In the palm, the soul fragment that originally belonged to Zhang Cheng was emitting a beautiful and dazzling luster. The owner of the hand clearly didn't give them any chance to react. They crushed the soul fragment and stuffed it into their souls. Then, as mental power surged in, the wounds on their bodies and souls healed rapidly. The soul fragment also slowly merged with them. "Damn it. Who exactly are you?" The initiators immediately broke free from their restraints when they sensed the intruder's intention. They retreated to a relatively safe distance and questioned loudly, "I'm sorry, you still have the right to know who I am. All you need to know is that you'll soon reach the main point of your life and become nourishment for his growth. Do you understand? I've seen countless miracles in my life, but I've never seen a life form from 2 parallel universes becoming rulers at the same time and finally merging together. I'm sure it'll be spectacular. Goodbye, loser." It won't be long before he comes looking for you. Byron, who was shrouded in his black robe, left behind a sinister smile as he spoke. He immediately disappeared into thin air as if he had never appeared. Chapter 1248. Damn it, it's that soul fragment. As Byron's black figure completely disappeared, the bespectacled man finally reacted. He immediately rushed forward to check on the initiator's condition. However, the latter raised his hand to stop him. No need to check. That soul fragment has already fused with me. There's no way to separate it. So your soul is in a state of resonance with it? The bespectacled man asked with a serious expression. The initiator nodded helplessly. That's right. My soul is already in a state of resonance, and it hasn't calmed down for a long time. I think it won't be long before he appears in front of me. Just like that fellow said, the end has come. Soul resonance. It was an extremely rare phenomenon that originated from the essence of life. Normally, this situation would only occur in a small number of special twins that evolve from one soul into two consciousnesses. Even if they lived separately after reaching adulthood, they would often be able to sense each other's inner feelings and even what the other was doing. Most importantly, under this resonance, they could even complete the unimaginable feat of exchanging bodies, memories, and spiritual communication. One had to know that this wasn't magic, nor was it a superpower. It was just a side effect of the resonance between souls. Relying on the resonance of souls, at a certain point in time, the twins would even have the chance to combine into one, giving birth to a new, more powerful, and more perfect version of themselves. Of course, the initiator was very clear that he and Zhang Cheng were definitely not twins, and there shouldn't be any resonance between souls. Otherwise, he would have taken advantage of the opportunity to kill him. But now, as the soul fragment was crushed and scattered in the deepest part of his soul, this unimaginable resonance occurred. If it were an idiot who didn't understand anything, they might think it was a coincidence. However, the initiator understood that there was a lot of knowledge that he didn't understand at all, precious knowledge about the mysteries of the soul. What was even more frightening was that the person who had this knowledge was now an ally of his opponent. The bespectacled man was very clear about what resonance meant. He suggested in a low voice, "You better hide quickly. Hide in a place where he'll never find you. Otherwise I'll die. I'll disappear." The initiator finished the sentence with a grave expression. After all, being devoured wasn't a death in the ordinary sense. It was the complete disappearance of one's spirit, body, and soul. It's good that you know. Bring your necessities and get moving quickly. The bespectacled man didn't say anything and directly handed over a backpack full of messy things. But for some reason, the initiator didn't reach out to take it. Instead, he smiled and shook his head. Escape? Where could he escape to? No. I had run away too many times in my long life, and I didn't want to run away again. I will face him head-on and use my own methods to determine the winner. Don't worry, I still have a chance of winning. Oh? Don't tell me you're planning to. The bespectacled man seemed to have thought of something as his eyes lit up. You're right. Devouring and merging is a process that both of us will have to face in the end. Although he seized the initiative, as long as I can survive the initial period and ensure that my subjective consciousness doesn't completely disappear, I will have a chance to turn the tables. The initiator didn't show any anger, panic, or fear when he said this. It was as if the line between life and death was blurred in his eyes. The disappearance of consciousness didn't mean true death. Perhaps it was just a deep sleep that would wake up one day. But what if you don't make it? The bespectacled man asked. The initiator shrugged nonchalantly. Then you can think of him as me. I believe he won't refuse to work with a genius like you. Right? As expected, both of you are the same type of people. Maybe I should look forward to seeing what kind of monster will be born when both of you merge into one. After saying this, the bespectacled man stood up and walked away without a trace of reluctance. He knew that this place would soon become the place where both of their fates would end. It would be the battlefield of their souls. Gru watched the bespectacled man's back as he walked away. After a long silence, he finally asked, "If you don't mind, can I stay?" "I'm sorry, my friend. This is between the two of us. I don't want a third party to be present. The initiator rejected his request without thinking. All right, I understand. Gru seemed to have expected this answer, so he followed the initiator's footsteps and chose to leave. After the two of them were completely gone, the initiator took a deep breath and shouted at the wall that was in a stagnant state, "Come out. I know you're there." As soon as he finished speaking, a figure slowly walked out from the inside of the wall that was supposed to be in a state of stillness. It was Zhang Cheng himself. He was not at all affected by the dark blue liquid that was scattered in every corner of the room. He asked in a slightly emotional tone, "When did you find me?" "No, I didn't notice you. I just instinctively felt that you must have been waiting for a long time," the initiator replied with a smile. "Then are you ready to accept your fate?" I'm ready. Come, let me see if your consciousness is stronger or if mine is stronger." Devour. Accompanied by a deep voice, Zhang Cheng directly abandoned the physical body that was created in the spiritual world. He injected everything, including his consciousness and spiritual power, into the Overlord's organ. Through this organ, he allowed his spiritual power to increase exponentially and nourish the heart of the Chaos Tree. In just a few seconds, a towering tree that reached into the clouds took root on this land. A large number of vines quickly tied the initiator from head to toe. However, the initiator didn't resist at all. He allowed the vines to drag him into the air. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't want to resist, but his subjective consciousness was no longer in his body. It was forcefully pulled into another place, a world inside the giant tree. Here, a bloodless battle was about to take place. At the same time, Byron had returned. He admired the astonishing power that the Chaos Tree unconsciously emitted from afar. He muttered to himself meaningfully, "Has it finally begun?" Chapter 1249. The Tree World. In an alternate dimension within the Tree of Chaos, two consciousnesses that had broken free from the limitations of their bodies were looking at each other in the form of pure souls. After a full minute, Zhang Cheng reached out his hand and plunged it into the other party's chest. He said in a cold and emotionless tone, "It's all over. From today onwards, I'm the only me, a truly perfect life." "The only one?" "No, you're not the only one. At least not for now. I'll hide in your consciousness and wait patiently for a second chance to be resurrected. As long as I firmly believe that I still exist, you'll never be able to erase the final imprint." The initiator did not attempt to resist. Instead, he left behind a profound message before he disappeared. "Do you think I'll give you a second chance?" Naive, under the resonance of souls. No matter how deeply your last remnant consciousness is hidden, you won't be able to escape my surveillance. Although I'm sorry to say this, I still have to tell you that you have no future. After saying that, Zhang Cheng's hand, that was plunged into the other party's chest, instantly released a faint silver light. The next second, the initiator's soul and consciousness instantly lost their human form. They turned into a ball of silver light that flowed along his arm and slowly merged into Zhang Cheng's body. Finally, when the two merged into one, the entire tree world began to change rapidly. Those originally hazy and blurry images became clear at a speed visible to the naked eye. All sorts of animals appeared in the desolate and silent environment. It was as if the dead world had suddenly come alive. In particular, the Overlord's remnant organs released a tremendous amount of spiritual energy that brought endless spirituality and vitality to this world. When Zhang Cheng opened his eyes once again, the tree world had already become a real world. Looking at the vibrant scenery before him, he could not help but purse his lips slightly. He muttered to himself, "This is the heart that belongs solely to me after devouring and fusing. A perfect world, but it's a pity that it doesn't suit my taste at all. Perhaps I'll need to make some small changes next." As soon as he finished speaking, a thick layer of dark clouds suddenly covered the clear sky. The green plants on the ground also distorted in an extremely short period of time, growing into eerie and terrifying human faces. As for those animals, they were all dead in less than a minute. What replaced them were spirits and spirits that were born from the corpses. Dark, evil, strange. From time to time, it would even let out a hair-raising sound. Zhangcheng nodded in satisfaction as he looked at the tree world that was rapidly changing under the influence of his consciousness. Awesome. This is the true reflection of my heart. A person who has completely assimilated into the darkness does not need a false light, much less a so-called peaceful harbor. Hypocrisy and weakness were the common problems of almost all intelligent life, and the inner world was the most direct manifestation of these two weaknesses. Among them, hypocrisy represented the restraint of one's true self. In order to cater to the group's values, one would castrate oneself in a foolish way, by cutting off one's strong desire and following certain established rules. One would avoid becoming an outlier in the group, avoid being persecuted, ostracized, and even fall into loneliness. It was essentially a kind of disguise and deceit, but as hypocrisy and ethics became a habit, it would completely strangle the infinite possibilities of the future, firmly keeping a creature in a well-designed framework. In contrast, although weakness did not have the ability to stifle infinite possibilities like hypocrisy, the danger it created was not small at all. Because weakness was a kind of self-protection mechanism, and because the most fundamental motivation of life itself was to live when encountering a powerful enemy or difficulty, the first thing one would think of was not to defeat it, but to stay far away to ensure one's own safety. From a certain point of view, weakness could allow an intelligent life to stay away from danger, away from pain and pressure, and live in a relatively relaxed environment. After all, ease and comfort was the ideal life that most ordinary life pursued. But regrettably, Zhangcheng was destined to have no fate with ease and comfort long ago. He would either become a failure on the path to the peak, falling from the mountainside into a bottomless abyss, or climb to the peak and look down on all life. With the conviction that he absolutely could not fail, he withdrew from the tree world and began to reconstruct a body that could accommodate his soul and consciousness. The moment the reconstruction was completed, Byron, who had been waiting for a long time, finally could not help but ask, "It's all over?" "Ah, it's all over." Zhangcheng nodded lightly. "Then can you tell me who you are? Or should I say, who is more of you now?" Byron's eyes flickered with a curious radiance. "I am me. I haven't changed at all. Only a new set of memories has appeared in my mind, as well as a new way of thinking. Devouring and fusing is not like what you think, accepting everything without any selectivity, but a type of filtering and optimization. In this process, I will lose some precious things, but I will also gain some precious things. All of this is for the sake of transcending, to make myself even more perfect." While saying these words, Zhangcheng inadvertently revealed a unique temperament, an aura that was completely different from what he had displayed before. Byron clearly sensed this and continued to ask with great interest, "I'm a bit curious. What did you lose, and what did you gain? Are you trying to pry into my privacy? Or are you trying to test whether or not I have reached the perfection that you desire?" Prying into the essence of the soul, no matter who it was a type of naked provocation. Zhangcheng did not immediately become hostile and could already be considered to be extremely calm and restrained. "Ha ha, of course not. I've always known that true perfection does not exist. All life forms standing at the peak of evolution, including you and me, can only infinitely approach perfection, but will never reach it. I'm just curious, what kind of level can a new life form born from the collision of two souls in a parallel universe reach? You want to fight me? That's right. Only strength is the most direct manifestation of a life's perfection. No, you're wrong. If strength is the most perfect manifestation of a life, then what's the use of knowledge and wisdom? True perfection is the combination of strength and wisdom, the tempering of the mind, body, and soul. Now, I'll let you experience what perfection is and what true strength is." As the last word left his mouth, Zhangcheng raised his right hand and pressed it against the tree of chaos beside him. Chapter 1250. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by a deafening boom, The giant tree that seemed to have penetrated the heavens and the earth suddenly came to life, and it was not hindered by the stagnation force field at all. It waved its branches that were as thick as an arm and directly erased the entire city from the horizon. That's right, it was erased. Those luxuriant branches seemed to possess some kind of mysterious magic. Anything that came into contact with them would produce a kind of marvelous fluctuation. Immediately after, they would be sucked away by tiny whirlpools that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. It wasn't decomposing. It wasn't destroying. Instead, it was sucked into another space. When Byron saw this strange scene, the two balls of cold light flickering in his eye sockets instantly contracted. With an uncertain tone, he asked, "Where did they all go? Also, how did you avoid the influence of a stagnation force field? I think you should be clearer than me about this point. After all, isn't your interesting teleportation ability based on the same principle?" Zhang Cheng kicked the ball back to Byron with a smile that wasn't a smile. In fact, since the first time they met, he had been very curious as to why Byron could ignore the consumption of his spiritual force and directly teleport back and forth in the spiritual world. However, after fusing with the soul of the initiator, he suddenly discovered that the spiritual world wasn't like what it appeared to be on the surface. It was just a vast expanse of whiteness, a circular belt that surrounded the outside of the material universe. This circular belt was actually divided into countless small pieces and then connected together through a kind of formless force field. Byron's teleportation was essentially using the traction force generated by the formless force field to instantly leap a very long distance. It gave people the feeling of teleportation. In contrast, Zhang Cheng was temporarily unable to accurately sense the minute differences between each section of the force field. Therefore, he couldn't make himself move at high speed. However, he could use the gaps between the force fields to throw certain things out of the spiritual world. As for where he threw them, whether it was the material universe or the deep blue ocean surrounding the material universe, that was unknown. You have indeed sensed their existence. Not bad. Very good. Byron cracked open his mouth to reveal a trace of a forced smile. Thank you for the compliment. If you don't mind, can you give me some time? I need to deal with some personal matters. Zhang Cheng didn't pay attention to the other party's extremely unnatural smile and took the opportunity to raise a request. Byron nodded without hesitation. Of course. Do as you please. Before the overlord we created destroys the spiritual world, you have enough time to deal with your personal matters. If that's the case, then I'll take my leave first. Zhang Cheng bowed slightly and put away the Tree of Chaos. With the help of the force field, he leaped across the horizon at an extremely fast speed, disappearing without a trace in a short while. The smile on Byron's face quickly disappeared as he watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance. It was replaced by a gloomy and callous expression. Damn it! He had also discovered the greatest mystery of the spiritual world. Was this the perfect fusion of souls? Maybe I should give it a try too. At the same time, tens of kilometers away from the city that had completely disappeared, the bespectacled man and Gru were nervously staring at the familiar figure that suddenly blocked their way. About 2 or 3 minutes later, the former took a deep breath and asked, "Who are you? Who do you think I am?" Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and asked, "So, he has disappeared, right?" The bespectacled man was obviously aware of what had happened, and his entire person revealed a faint sadness. "That's right. You can think that he has disappeared, or you can think that he has become a part of me. Now, can we talk about the next plan?" Zhang Cheng went straight to the point. This was because he knew that the bespectacled man would not interfere with the grudges and competition between him and the initiator. No matter who was the winner in the end, cooperation was still necessary. Of course, this is also what he wants. The bespectacled man gave an affirmative answer. Although the disappearance of his old friend made him feel a little sad and disappointed, this sadness and disappointment could not be compared to the uncovering of the final secret. In fact, if killing the initiator could obtain the real answer, he would definitely stab the initiator in the back with the most fatal knife without hesitation. Betrayal was as simple as eating and drinking for those with huge ambitions or those who bitterly pursued the truth and knowledge. In their eyes, apart from their own goals, there was nothing that could not be sacrificed, and there was nothing that could not be abandoned. Zhang Cheng was one of them, and naturally understood this feeling. He quickly turned his head to look at the beetle-like Gru and greeted him with a smile. "Long time no see. I didn't expect you to abandon your identity as a ruler and come to the spiritual world to find a way to break through the ceiling. I have no choice. I don't want to stay in the material universe and wait for you to complete your self-transcendence, then sweep all the rulers into the trash. I also have my own pursuits and dreams. I don't know if you are willing to accept me as an ally." Gru deliberately pretended to be helpless as he mocked himself. Now that things had developed to this point, he was very clear that he could not go further than this young fellow in front of him on the path of transcendence. "Why not? You must know that the person we are scheming against this time is the first ruler born in the material universe. At the same time, he is also the creator who ignited the spark of civilization and wisdom in the spiritual world." Zhang Cheng smiled as he threw out a heavy bomb. "The first ruler? The creator? You mean Byron, who almost destroyed the material universe and then suddenly disappeared, is now in the same world as us?" Without a doubt, this news shocked both of them to the point that they were speechless. In particular, the name Byron had become a taboo in the material universe. In order to conceal that terrifying disaster and the fear in his heart, the old rulers had deliberately erased his name from history, leaving only a few words in extremely few ancient books. However, Gru and the bespectacled man were clearly observant. They had looked through the contents that had been deliberately hidden and knew that this was the first ruler who was worshipped like a god. He was even more aware that most of the veteran sovereigns had only been able to obtain such power under his guidance and leadership. Most importantly, this first ruler had already become a creator in the spiritual world. Then, how great was his true power? Chapter 12:51. Zhang Cheng had experienced betrayal countless times in his life. He couldn't even remember how many allies he had betrayed or how many allies he had betrayed. From the very beginning, he had never intended to establish a relationship of trust with anyone, much less believe that there was such a thing as a win-win situation in this world. From the perspective of the desires and greed of intelligent life, getting rid of all competitors and monopolizing all benefits was the most perfect method of distribution. In contrast, the method of maintaining mutual deterrence and dividing the cake according to strength was merely a stopgap measure, not the civilization that many fools believed it to be. In fact, all civilizations were built on the foundation of violence. It was powerful violence that forced intelligent life to become civilized. If it didn't become civilized, it was very likely that everything they had would be burned to ashes in the flames of war, not their own desire to develop in the direction of civilization. In Zhang Cheng's eyes, reaching an agreement with Byron to unearth the mysteries of the deep blue sea didn't conflict with getting rid of him afterwards. After all, human nature was selfish. Compared to sharing authority that surpassed the final limit with two people, it was far better for one person to enjoy it alone. Just like that, after settling the initiator's good friend and Gru, Zhang Cheng revealed all the information he knew about Byron. He had the two of them begin to analyze the weaknesses that this original ruler might have, as well as the flaws in his personality. As for himself, he silently followed behind the overlord he had personally created, admiring how this completely distorted creature pushed the spiritual world step by step into the abyss of destruction. Bang, 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 accompanied by extremely rhythmic sounds, two creatures that weren't very large in size constantly collided with each other in an empty space. It wasn't just their own collisions, but also the intense collisions in the surroundings. Almost every collision was like the end of the world, erupting with earth-shaking scenes of doomsday. Without a doubt, this was a contest of spiritual force, a contest between overlords at the top of the food chain. One of them was a distorted creature that had been born not long ago, emitting a faint purple radiance all over its body. The other was the overlord that had led the attack on the laboratory. It was clear that even though they had developed from special embryos, the attributes of their internal powers were completely different. Primal overlords were closer to the essence of a mental world, and their attacks were mostly direct collisions with their mental powers. Coupled with their massive reserves, ordinary life forms would probably not even be able to last a single round before being smashed to smithereens. However, the distorted overlord was different. Its source of power was not only mental strength, but also the seawater of the deep blue ocean. Every time he attacked, he would force everything around him to enter a state of deceleration, or even a state of stagnation. With this cheat-like ability, in just a short while, the latter had beaten the former to a pulp. Even the home ground that they had created was in jeopardy. It was hard to say when it would completely collapse. Just as Zhang Cheng began to estimate how long it would take for his creation to finish off the primordial overlord before him, the primordial overlord suddenly seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. Its entire body rapidly collided as its core flickered with a terrifying light. Damn it! He cursed softly and did not hesitate at all. He immediately used the almost imperceptible force fields in the spiritual realm to escape the scene as fast as he could. But before he could run far, a blinding ray of light pierced through heaven and earth. Silence. It was abnormally quiet. There was not the slightest sound. There was only that dazzling white light that stretched as far as the eye could see. When the light completely dissipated, Zhang Cheng was surprised to find that there was nothing left where the primordial overlord had been. That's right, there was nothing left. It was not like the normal spiritual realm, which was a white plain that stretched as far as the eye could see. Instead, it was an indescribable emptiness and nothingness. In short, this place that originally belonged to the spiritual realm had been permanently damaged by the overlord's self-destructive power. It was very obvious that the power of order that maintained the operation of the spiritual realm had sensed that the white blood cells that it used to destroy the invaders had become diseased, so it planned to use this method of mutual destruction to solve its own problems. Unfortunately, the distorted overlord had also discovered the danger in advance and used its stagnation ability to delay the process, barely escaping from the center. Although its injuries were terrifying, it was not dead yet. Whoa! Under the domination of pain and despair, this life form that emitted a lavender radiance growled and sent a distress signal to its creator. This was because it understood that if it wanted to live, it had to be treated. Otherwise, when the next overlord arrived, it would be its death. Relax. Relax. Let me take a look at your wound. Zhang Cheng carefully came to the edge of the emptiness and nothingness, bent down, and softly comforted this life form that was on the verge of death. In just a few seconds, he was shocked by the residual power around the wound. At the same time, he also realized how much his and Byron's actions had affected and stimulated the entire spiritual realm. In order to completely destroy this monster that was enough to push this world into the abyss, they did not hesitate to sacrifice some of the overlords to maintain order. In other words, the suicidal attack just now was no longer purely spiritual power. It could also directly injure the soul. One must know that the soul was the most important component of a life form, and it was also one of the most difficult parts to repair. Once the soul was damaged to a certain extent, even if the creature was still alive, it was no different from being dead. There was no hesitation. After discovering the counterattack from the spiritual realm, Zhang Cheng immediately erased the residual energy around the wound and repaired the distorted overlord's soul at the same time. He understood that if this situation continued, the scattered overlords would soon gather together. At that time, if the distorted overlord had not grown to the point where it could destroy the spiritual realm, neither he nor Byron would have a good life. As the distorted overlord's injuries began to recover little by little, Zhang Cheng gradually became aware of the oppressive feeling from the surrounding environment. There was no need to ask to know that this was the spiritual realm rejecting the person who broke the balance. It was extremely eager to kill him so that the world could return to its original normal state. Not only him, but Byron, who was far away in another place, also felt this naked malice. He sneered and muttered to himself, "Want to kill me? Come on then. Let's see who can kill who first." Chapter 1252. What was the motivation for a life form to destroy an entire world? If it were a normal person, the answer would definitely be pain, hatred, and despair. However, Zhang Cheng was the exact opposite. He believed that the deepest love was the source of the idea of destroying everything. In fact, he did the same. This overlord whose mind and consciousness had been completely distorted had been instilled with too much love for the spiritual world, which was why it had the idea of destroying it. Of course, there was also a little bit of conscious guidance. From the beginning to the end, Zhang Cheng and Byron didn't tamper with the overlord's memories or way of thinking because it was impossible to achieve. As an overlord standing at the peak of the spiritual world's evolution, it represented an extension of the world's will. They were guardians, cleaners, and, at the same time, the maintainers of order. Their love for this world exceeded the sum of all other life forms. What Zhang Cheng took advantage of was precisely this unforgettable love, and he instilled some overly beautiful and idealistic things into her. As everyone knew, although idealists were known as the driving force of civilization and social progress, they were an out-and-out moving disaster in any era, whether it was to their own bodies or to the people around them. Often, the more capable an idealist was, the more tragic the disaster they created, even at the cost of thousands of lives. Obviously, in the process of the distorted overlord being guided, Zhang Cheng had added too many overly idealistic things, even overly beautifying the existing cycle of the spiritual world. The moment this perfect ideal collided with reality, the distorted overlord's heart was filled with unparalleled anger. It felt that it had been deceived and betrayed, which ultimately led to the idea of destroying everything and starting over. It didn't understand that it was just a pawn being used. Under Zhang Cheng's careful treatment, the warped overlord soul was quickly restored to its previous state. As for the trauma caused by the spiritual impact, it didn't take long for it to completely heal. Not only did its spiritual power not decrease, but it also increased slightly. After all, the original overlord's self-destruction was essentially a release of spiritual power. Excluding the part that was swept into the void, the rest permeated the surrounding environment. As an overlord, absorbing the spiritual energy in the surrounding environment was as simple as eating and drinking. Feeling that its body had regained its health and vitality, the distorted overlord immediately knocked away its creator and returned to its original arrogant posture. It strode elegantly and disappeared into the white horizon in a few steps. As soon as it left, Byron appeared out of thin air and asked in a slightly teasing tone, "How was it? Did you feel it? It's the malice of the entire world." "Of course. This is within our expectations, isn't it?" Zhang Cheng shrugged nonchalantly. "How do you plan to deal with it? Should we hide as much as possible, or should we go all out?" Byron's eyes flickered with a dangerous glint. "Ha ha. Was there need to ask? Keeping a low profile is not what we should be doing right now. How about it? Are you interested in making a scene with me?" Zhang Cheng also had a crazy smile on his face. "What's your plan? Are you interested in conquering another birthplace? Then it will be completely polluted, distorted, and completely set off an all-out war that can shake the foundation of the spiritual world." All-out war. I like this word. Your plan is very much to my taste. Then what are we waiting for? Let's get started. At the same time, we can also buy some time for the little guy we created to grow. After all, it hasn't been born for long enough to deal with several original overlords at the same time. Don't worry, my dear friend. Conquering a birthplace is not an easy task. We still need to make some preparations. No, there's no need to prepare. It's enough to go to the deep blue ocean and get more water. Anyway, for you and me, the spiritual world is just a toy destined to be abandoned. It doesn't matter if it's broken. Ah, you're really cold and heartless. There is nothing scarier than two lunatics together, especially those lunatics who never cared about the life or death of others, let alone the consequences. Under Zhang Cheng's instigation, Byron and his servants drew an endless amount of water from the deep blue ocean and poured it directly into the birthplace. Regardless of whether it was the overlords stationed there or the newly born life forms, all of them were eventually turned into living statues by the earth-shattering tide. 2/3 of the birthplace stopped functioning, and not a single life form was born for a long time. As for the remaining 1/3, it became nourishment for the tree of chaos under Zhang Cheng's control. Under the power of chaos, every newly born life form was filled with destructive and violent elements. They were more aggressive than the original life forms. Even if they weren't hungry, they would endlessly kill and devour until there was nothing left alive in the surroundings. It was obvious that this was an undisguised act of plunder and destruction. Moreover, as the second birthplace was destroyed, the rejection and malice from the entire spiritual world became more and more intense. Byron and Zhang Cheng could no longer absorb spiritual energy normally to replenish their own consumption. Unfortunately, not only did these two lunatics have no intention of stopping, but they also intensified their attacks and launched another attack on the third birthplace. Appreciating the growing and boiling spiritual energy not far away, Byron pursed his lips and teased, "It seems like we've pissed off the entire world." Yes, we've pissed it off. Look at the energy filling the Overlord's body. It's almost exceeding the limits of its physical body. Zhang Cheng also smiled in agreement, not at all panicking because of the incomparably powerful enemy in front of them. To be honest, even though this is the second time I've personally experienced such malice, it still gives me a strong sense of addiction. Byron stuck out his dry tongue and licked his teeth. Nervous, exciting, tremors that came from his soul. Those who weren't rejected by the entire world would never understand the feeling of losing one's life at any time. It was like a bone-piercing sea breeze suddenly blowing into one's collar, causing goosebumps to appear all over one's body. Hee, it's indeed addictive. To be honest, I've already started to get addicted to this feeling. Are you interested in making this feeling stronger? You mean, Chapter 1253. I believe you should be very clear that the reason why we are rejected is because we have destroyed the foundation of the entire spiritual world. Therefore, the subconscious that controls this world has decided that we are intruders and destroyers and is trying to eliminate us. It is like an external virus invading your body, and the body's immune system will automatically react. Normally speaking, this reaction will be divided into several stages. At the beginning, this kind of counterattack will appear relatively weak and can even be said to be a type of probing. If no excessive actions are taken, it will gradually calm down, just like how the bacteria and viruses in the body will form a kind of microsecond equilibrium. Regarding this stage, you should have more right to speak than I do. After all, you have invaded a place of birth and transformed it into the way you want it to be. But what is interesting is that the transformation you carried out didn't pose any real threat to the existence of the spiritual world. On the contrary, it accelerated the evolution of life and allowed intelligent life to construct a true civilization from nothing. If my guess is not wrong, your current terrible appearance is the inevitable result of being rejected for a long time in the initial stage, right? At this point, Zhang Cheng deliberately paused and raised his head to look at the other party's shriveled body. Without a doubt, this wasn't Byron's original appearance, but something similar to a curse that turned him into his current state of being neither human nor ghost. So you have already noticed it. That's right, I've always been suffering from this world's curse. Especially recently, this curse has almost touched the depths of my soul. Byron took the initiative to remove his hood for the first time, revealing his shriveled face that could frighten ordinary people to death. Above his forehead, there was a clear X-shaped mark that constantly flickered with a faint silver light. It was very clear that this was the mark left on his body by the vague consciousness of the world, an imprint that could never be removed. So it was like this. After verifying his guess, Zhang Cheng thoughtfully nodded and unhurriedly continued. Next is the second stage, which is also the stage we are currently experiencing. The vague consciousness of the world has confirmed the threat and began to do everything in its power to eliminate us, not hesitating to pay a certain price. But after this stage, there is a final stage, which is also the craziest stage. So you plan to go from a second stage to the third? Byron raised the corner of his mouth, revealing an expression of interest. Yes, in the third phase, the entire world would be plunged into endless rage and madness. Only then will you have the chance to truly see the essence of the spiritual world and its potential and power, Zhang Chung explained meaningfully. True power and potential. Byron seemed to have thought of something, and his dry eyes flickered with a strange light. Yes, don't you think that, as a part of the material universe that reflects each other, the spiritual world should be far more complicated than it looks on the surface? Zhang Chung raised the speculation in his heart. Here, one could clearly feel the projection of the material universe, and even the environment was filled with a large amount of matter and energy. On the other hand, the influence of mental power on the species universe was pitifully small. Apart from a few uses of the soul and magic, it was almost impossible to see the influence of mental power. There was no doubt that this phenomenon was very abnormal. Either the mental world was a part of the physical universe, and its status was equivalent to a vassal instead of an equal position. Either the mental world appeared later than the physical universe, or it was still developing and had a long way to go before it fully matured. No matter which it was, as a researcher, he had to get to the bottom of it. Byron stroked his chin and pondered for a moment, then immediately agreed. What you said makes sense. Then what are we waiting for? Let's directly begin the final phase. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately released an astonishing power, infinitely magnifying the almost undetectable force field. In the blink of an eye, the ground was torn apart by the force field, and the primordial overlord couldn't even move a single step under the powerful restraint. It could only watch as it was swallowed up by the void bit by bit. Anger, unwillingness, and the self-destruction that followed. After an earth-shattering boom, the third birthplace disappeared forever. However, this was only the beginning. When the third birthplace disappeared, the strong malice almost instantly condensed into a substance. A hole was torn open in the sky, and endless, enormous, illusory figures that were completely made up of mental power gushed toward the two of them like a tide. Seeing this shocking scene, Zhang Chung did not show a trace of fear. Instead, he opened his mouth and laughed. Ha! Wonderful! This is what I'm looking forward to. Do you feel it? That power, that's enough to kill us. Hee hee. How can I not feel it? My hand, my leg, every cell in my body is trembling. How many years has it been? This is the first time. You're right. The potential of this world is far from being fully unearthed. Byron suppressed the excitement in his heart, and his entire body trembled slightly uncontrollably. Even he himself could not tell whether he was trembling from excitement, fear, or a little bit of both. Then are you ready to start fleeing? You must know that if we don't escape this time, we'll really die without a burial ground. Zhang Chung ignored the approaching shadow, turned around, and probed with a spurious smile. I'm ready. Once we're done fleeing, it'll be the moment of this world's destruction. With that, Byron didn't hesitate at all, and directly used the force field to move at a speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. The enormous shadows that filled the sky followed closely behind, and wherever they passed, the sky fell and the earth cracked. It was as if nothing could stop these big fellows that couldn't be considered alive. Similarly, Zhang Chung didn't dare to stay any longer and fled to another place in the same way. As the initiator, he knew very well that once they entered the final stage, he and Byron would be regarded as the biggest threat. The entire mental world would do whatever it took to completely eliminate the two of them, even if it meant perishing together. There would be no negotiation, no moderation, and it wouldn't end before the goal was achieved. He could either hold on until the last step of the twisted overlord's plan or die on the way. There was no third choice. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1254. Flee. Flee with all their might. No rest. No rest. Heaven and earth changed color wherever they passed, as if the end of the world had arrived. While Zhang Cheng and Byron were fleeing in opposite directions, Gru and the bespectacled man were hiding in the dark, silently observing the changes in the world. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps it was a few days, perhaps it was a few months when the first set of data was collected, the bespectacled man finally curled his lips and commented in a slightly deranged tone. He's really a lunatic. He actually thought of using this method to achieve two unspeakable goals at the same time. One is to figure out the potential of the spiritual world, and the other is to find out the hidden strength of the original ruler. You're right. This is indeed crazy enough. Look at the strange scene outside and the extent of the world's destruction. Anyone with a normal mind and rationality would definitely not attempt such a thing. Gru nodded in agreement. The destruction happening outside had far exceeded the spiritual world's ability to withstand and repair. Many places were even swallowed up by nothingness, forming broken scars one after another. Evidently, this was the most violent side of the empty world's consciousness after entering its final stage. Just like a body that was terminally ill, the immune system no longer cared about the life and death of the patient, and only wanted to use the last of its strength to eliminate the greatest threat. As for the patient's subjective consciousness, it could not control the body's immune system at all. Moreover, the empty world's consciousness did not have any so-called independent consciousness at all. It was only a conditioned reflex and did not possess complex thinking and judgment abilities. The bespectacled man seemed to recall the days when he was with the originator and sighed softly. That's right. Perhaps this is the biggest difference between us and him. Ambition and desire always need a little bit of madness to support it. If a person isn't crazy enough, they won't be able to make a desperate decision at a crucial moment. That's why you and I will never be able to accomplish something independently. We need to find a similar collaborator. Do you really trust him? You must know that he just killed your best friend. Gru asked with great interest. He was obviously very interested in the relationship between the two of them. To be precise, it was the relationship between the three of them, but one of them had completely disappeared. Why not? The man habitually adjusted the glasses on the bridge of his nose that didn't play any role in correcting his vision. In my opinion, he is no different from my previous companions in essence. It can even be said that they are essentially the same. Perhaps the only difference is that he, who won the final victory, is more adventurous than my previous companions. He is good at using everything around him to create favorable conditions for himself. No, you don't understand what I mean. What I'm trying to say is that he's someone who's good at deceiving and betraying. Are you sure he won't kill us once and for all after achieving his goal? Gru raised a crucial question. After all, Zhang Cheng had betrayed his allies too many times during his growth. Some of them had even made up their minds to betray their allies at some point in the future. Others might not be aware of this history, but Gru, who had personally traveled to the parallel world, had witnessed everything. The allies that fell under Zhang Cheng's feet one by one showed how dangerous and untrustworthy he was. Betrayal, that's an interesting topic. The bespectacled man smiled and nodded. He obviously knew what Gru was trying to say. After organizing his words, he quickly said, "First of all, I want to make one thing clear. Betrayal isn't so much a moral issue as it is a matter of interest. Therefore, the prerequisite for betrayal is that there is a conflict of interest between the two parties. Do you think he has a conflict of interest with us now? Or rather, do you think you can pose any threat to him? Although I'm a little unwilling to answer like this, I really don't pose any threat to him now." Gru sighed helplessly. Since he can't pose any threat, why would he betray you? Most importantly, do you think that the original ruler who called himself Byron is easy to deal with? Before we get rid of him, there won't be any conflict of interest between us. On the contrary, under the premise of an external threat, our alliance will become incomparably firm. Therefore, instead of worrying about whether or not we'll be betrayed, why don't you worry about what kind of danger we'll face if the plan fails? As he spoke, the bespectacled man began to process the data that he had risked his life to collect. In particular, the huge shadows that tore through the sky and entered the spiritual world left the strongest mark on the instrument. It was obvious that they hadn't been created out of thin air. Instead, they had been nurtured for a long time, but they were still in a state between life and non-life. It was like a primordial god that had begun to form on some planets, but had yet to be awakened. Driven by the empty consciousness of a world, they were forced to participate in this doomed pursuit. Gru wasn't an idiot. He naturally knew what the bespectacled man was referring to. He also picked up a set of data and asked without raising his head, "What do you think these huge shadows are? Gods of the spiritual world? Or something else?" "Sorry, it's hard to tell based on the data we've obtained. However, one thing is certain. Their strength isn't inferior to an overlord's at all. In fact, they might even be a little stronger. Look at the floating values of spiritual power. As long as it touches even a little, whether it's you or me, we'll be instantly torn to shreds." His speculation is correct. The spiritual world is still in a stage of slow development. It's far from being as mature as the physical universe. The bespectacled man replied without raising his head. It was obvious that the data made him excited, so much so that his eyes were shining brightly. After all, as a researcher, there was nothing more important than detailed data as a basis for reference. But this world is about to be destroyed. What's the point of researching this? Gru turned around and looked at the shattered sky and land in the distance. Of course there's a point. Do you think the spiritual world will cease to exist when it's destroyed? No. Its destruction is only the beginning. Next, spiritual and physical will directly collide and perfectly merge to give birth to a new universe. A universe that has both spiritual and physical properties. When that happens, a creature that has broken the barrier will become the only ruler. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1255. In front of him was a vast expanse of whiteness, while behind him was an apocalyptic scene of mountains collapsing and the earth cracking. Even though this situation had been going on for a long time, Zhang Cheng still felt an indescribable sense of awkwardness. This was because after the entire spiritual world entered its final stage, the empty world's consciousness seemed to have gone crazy. It had already destroyed nearly 1/5 of the place in the process of chasing after him. Everywhere it passed was all collapsed space, as well as distortion and nothingness. There were even some places that were directly swallowed up by the dark blue seawater buried under the spiritual world, forming a forbidden land for life. This kind of action with a strong tendency to perish together with self-destruction was undoubtedly far beyond his expectations. Judging from the speed of the chase, it wouldn't stop even if the spiritual world was completely destroyed. There was no doubt that this was absolutely abnormal. It even made him wonder if he had triggered some hidden mechanism that shouldn't have been triggered. But unfortunately, there was no possibility of all this stopping now. Zhang Cheng could only hope that when the empty world's consciousness focused its attention on him and Byron, the distorted overlord could quickly complete its mission. Just as he relied on the force field again and again to barely avoid the huge shadows, the seemingly solid malice that was strolling around him suddenly paused. The next second, crack, 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 accompanied by a strange sound, whether it was the vast expanse of whiteness in front of him or the apocalyptic scene behind him. They were all like ice on a lake in winter, cracking open with lines visible to the naked eye. Immediately after, these lines spread out in all directions at an extremely fast speed, like a spiderweb. In the end, the moment these cracks filled every inch of space, shattering and destruction arrived as expected. Bang, 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 bang. Every time it shattered, the surrounding space would be pulled tight into an unknown vortex, and the original place would be filled with dark blue seawater. As more and more space was swallowed and submerged by the seawater, the spiritual world's support structure collapsed. Zhang Cheng could clearly feel that the rules that dominated this world were rapidly declining, even heading towards extinction. Spirit was no longer the only power with a dominant position. Matter and energy began to break free from control and exist in a relatively independent manner. Clearly, this was equivalent to the return and release of power for him, the ruler of the physical universe. In order to increase his strength to the greatest extent possible, he released the Tree of Chaos once again without hesitation and began to construct the nomological attributes that were beneficial to him. In just a short while, the space around the Tree of Chaos had stabilized and was slowly absorbing the parts that had lost control and collapsed. At the same time, Byron, who was far away on the other side of the ring belt, had undoubtedly discovered this point. He pursed his lips and sneered as he muttered to himself, "Ah, it was finally over. That creation has completed its mission, and the spiritual world is finished." Clearly, the laws that maintain the operation of a massive world would not collapse for no reason. Coupled with the fact that the naked malice surrounding him had completely disappeared, anyone who wasn't an idiot would know what had happened behind his back. However, he didn't care if the distorted overlord was dead or alive. Like Zhang Cheng, he quickly began to construct rules that were beneficial to him. At the same time, he gathered the shattered mental strength and prepared to attack the deep blue ocean below. Due to some special attributes, the seawater would strip away everything that came into contact with it and then turn it into a pure state. Therefore, if one wanted to see deeper, one had to inject energy or matter that exceeded the upper limit of its carrying capacity. It was obvious that the collapsing spiritual world was the most ideal filler. In particular, the omnipresent and massive mental strength could definitely satisfy the urgent need for quantity. Soon, relying on his skillful control of the rules, Byron was the first to gather a huge sphere full of mental strength. He grinned and laughed wildly. "Come on, let me see what's under the deep blue sea and what secrets are hidden." As soon as he finished speaking, he directly threw his massive mental strength down. In an instant, under the pressure of the mental strength, the deep blue seawater released an astonishing feedback. Monstrous waves drowned everything around them. However, the massive mental strength was not completely devoured. After consuming more than half of it, it successfully entered the water and exploded violently. Boom! A few seconds after the explosion ended, Byron finally saw the long-awaited scene, an isolation layer hidden under the deep blue water. Above the isolation layer, a large number of blank souls were densely packed. Among them, there were souls that went from the physical universe to the spiritual world, and there were also souls that went from the spiritual world to the physical universe. These souls were like white paper without any consciousness or memory. They lay quietly on the isolation layer. Every once in a while, one or two would break free and perfectly integrate into the new world. During the whole slow and sensitive process, the soul would carry something from its previous world. The two universes influenced each other in this way. The only last words were that the spiritual world seemed to be born later, or rather developed later. Therefore, whether it was quantity or quality, it was far from being comparable to the physical universe. Looking at the secret that was gradually covered by the deep blue seawater again, Byron couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Ha ha ha! So that's it. So that's it. If you want to break the boundary, you first need to completely strip away the mental and physical, and even abandon the essence of your own life. Perhaps it's just as the saying goes, only by forgetting the past can you have the qualifications to create the future." As the last word left his mouth, he didn't hesitate to strip away everything from his body and threw himself into the deep blue seawater in the form of a pure soul. He already understood the final mystery of breaking the boundary and surpassing himself. At the same time, he made a firm resolution that no matter what the result was, he had to unswervingly take the final step. Because only those who took this step had the qualifications to merge the two worlds and create a brand new and perfect universe. As for failure, as someone who had never truly tasted failure, Byron simply didn't consider this problem. Self-confidence, or perhaps strong conceit, had long since seeped into his bones, becoming a characteristic that was intertwined with his personality and soul. In less than a minute, his pale soul had already disappeared under the deep blue seawater, slowly attaching itself to the isolation layer. Chapter 1256. After Byron jumped into the deep blue sea in the form of a pure soul, The bespectacled man and Gru sensed it and looked around nervously. When they sensed the astonishing power remaining in the surroundings, as well as the abnormality of the deep blue sea, the former immediately adjusted his glasses and said in an emotionless tone, "This lunatic really did make his choice without hesitation. Should I say, as expected of the first ruler?" "What? You mean he abandoned everything for that almost non-existent possibility?" Gru was so shocked that he almost cried out. As a ruler, he had lived for a long time and had seen many talented geniuses. However, he never thought that someone would be willing to take such a huge risk for a chance to surpass the limits. According to the analysis of the data, the probability of surviving the deep blue sea in a soul state was negligible. After all, a soul had to retain its most basic self-awareness to be considered a living soul. If everything was erased, then it would be a piece of white paper, no different from any other piece of white paper. No sane life form would accept such an outcome. It was even more terrifying than death. But now, there was a lunatic who was willing to risk everything to challenge and attempt it. Moreover, this lunatic was the famous Byron, the first ruler born in the material universe. Even if he came to the spiritual world, he could still become a creator. Was he stupid? The answer was obviously no. The bespectacled man clearly sensed the reaction of his ally and nodded with a smile. That's right. Right now, his soul is probably attached to the isolation zone. After countless years of baptism, he will once again return to the material universe. If at that time he still retains a bit of his memories or self-awareness, then he can become the first life form to break through the limits and even carry out Genesis. Genesis? Gru's pupils violently contracted. Yes, as the name suggests, it is to recreate the space we know, including the material universe, the collapsed spiritual world, the deep blue sea, and that mysterious isolation zone. The man stroked his chin, an expression of excitement and anticipation appearing on his face. "I don't understand. What does he need to do to achieve this?" Gru carefully probed. "It's very simple. Since the deep blue ocean could be seen from the spiritual world, theoretically, it could also be seen from the physical universe. It was just that when the connection point between the two worlds was opened, a large amount of spiritual power surged in and concealed this. Think about it. He has two different powers at the same time. If he can control the souls on the isolation belt, then he can control the entire deep blue ocean and break the isolation between mind and matter. What do you think will happen next?" The bespectacled man made a hypothesis. Gru was so shocked that he couldn't speak. After a long while, he smiled bitterly and replied, "A broken fence will destroy everything. Parallel universes, dimensions, celestial bodies, these things would all be destroyed, replaced by chaos and the establishment of new laws. Countless civilizations will disappear because of this, and even the sovereigns will be cruelly eliminated. Nothing will be spared from this disaster." No. Please don't use the word disaster. This Genesis was the most important revolution since the birth of the physical universe and the spiritual world. However, I'm still not certain whether the one guiding and dominating this revolution is Byron or our equally insane ally. Saying that, the man raised his head and gazed at the other end of the shattered world. At this very moment, the chaos tree had already absorbed more than a quarter of the shattered spiritual world, including those massive illusory figures. However, as the master of the chaos tree, Zhang Cheng clearly hadn't made up his mind. He was sitting alone at the edge of the tree world, looking down at the boundless deep blue ocean from above. It was obvious that he had used his immense spiritual power to smash open the surface of the ocean and see the isolation belt hidden inside, as well as the countless blank souls on the isolation belt. However, the problem was that he wasn't like Byron, who had been trapped in the spiritual world for a long time, to the extent that he had sunk into a state of madness and hysteria for a long time. He couldn't use himself as a stake in a gamble that had an almost zero chance of winning. Just as Zhang Cheng was in a dilemma and hesitation, a familiar voice suddenly rang out in his ears. "Are you scared? It's you? You haven't disappeared?" Zhang Cheng stood up abruptly, his entire body instantly entering a state of nervous tension. This was because this voice didn't belong to a human, but to the initiator that he had devoured not long ago. Disappear? No, I've never disappeared. I've just fused with you. A long, long time ago, I've silently created a consciousness imprint. Now, this imprint is in your body, in the deepest part of your soul. But don't worry, I don't have any strength to resist now. I just want to remind you, where did your reckless madness go? If you look ahead and don't look back, you'll lose the initiative in this competition and become a pathetic loser. You want me to try something that might not even have a 1 in a billion chance of success? Zhang Cheng asked with a frown. There was no doubt that he felt terrible when he suddenly realized that the initiator, who should have completely disappeared, was still living in his body. He even felt that the initiator was a ticking time bomb that might explode at any moment and cause him a lot of trouble. Why not? Don't you know that the chances of success are actually about the same when advancing to ruler? I know that you've always hated failure and think that failure is a humiliation, an unforgivable mistake. But sometimes you have to take the crucial step first to have a chance of success. Otherwise, you don't even have the right to fail. Genesis, what a great temptation. You can become the ruler and creator of a new world, and you can also permanently erase the imprint I left behind. The initiator's tone revealed an undisguised bewitchment. Genesis? That's right. Genesis. That's the result I want to see the most. At least before I disappear forever. You can see a brand new world full of hope and a future. But I don't trust you. You don't need to trust me. You only need to trust yourself. Because I'm also a part of you. Only when you fail and begin to deny yourself from the bottom of your heart will I have the opportunity to take over. Chapter 12:57. Mocha, a planet located in a remote corner of the Red Nebula Belt in the material universe. The reason why it was special was that there were 3 stars of different colors in the galaxy where it was located. These stars provided sufficient radiation for this small planet. Therefore, an advanced and prosperous magic civilization gradually developed, and even had the ability to travel across long distances in the galaxy. Especially the Dalent people, who were the main body of the civilization, were not only the typical conquerors, but also the rulers of dozens of parallel worlds and subsidiary subspaces. The root of maintaining this huge exploitation and colonization system was the Ring of Space that they spent hundreds of years to build. Of course, the name of the Ring of Space did not mean that this device was a ring. On the contrary, it was a light beam that surrounded the interior of the planet. Through the portal inside the light beam, the Dalent people could dispatch a large number of military forces to a world where there was a rebellion at any time and eliminate the threat before it was in its infancy. The natives of this world who were included in this system were both angry and fearful of these slender invaders with large eyes and disproportionate heads. However, just a few days ago, the enslaved original inhabitants suddenly discovered an interesting phenomenon. That was, the portal connected to the Ring of Space suddenly closed. To be precise, the entire Ring of Space and all the worlds connected to it were all cut off at the same time. At the same time, in less than a few days, the terrifying energy storm destroyed all the advanced but fragile magic items, leaving behind a large number of corpses that did not manage to escape in time and broken ruins. Damn it, what happened? Where are those vicious invaders? A creature with a face full of fine fur and an upright appearance like a cat frowned and cautiously approached a magic fortress built by the Dalent people. As one of the closest planets to Mocha, his home had been enslaved by the other party for more than 1,000 years. The important and scarce resources were almost exhausted. On the surface of the entire planet, except for a large area of worthless desert, there were only a few oases left that could support life. Without a doubt, this was a dilapidated planet that was about to be destroyed. In order to survive, he had to take the risk to get close to the magic fortress because the magic fortress occupied the only important water source nearby. If he couldn't bring back enough water, his tribe would die of thirst. Similarly, if he was caught by the Dalent, he would be humiliated and become a slave. He would be brought back to planet Mocha and sold to the nobles as a rare pet. Freedom and survival. It was always an extremely difficult choice. The nimble creature, about 1.6 meters tall, stealthily avoided the magical alarms around the oasis and successfully entered the interior of the fortress. Looking at the luxurious carpet on the floor, the large pieces of precious crystals and gems used for illumination on the walls and ceilings, as well as a large number of gold-plated and silver-plated decorations, he couldn't help but take a deep breath and forcibly suppress the greed in his heart. He took out a huge water sack from his backpack and started to quickly fill it with water from the fountain. While accepting it, he did not forget to crazily pour water into his dry mouth. After a long while, he finally stopped after not drinking a single drop of water for 7 or 8 days. He let out a long sigh and muttered to himself, "Phew, I'm finally alive again. I thought I would die of thirst. How strange. Where did those vicious Dalent go? Could it be that they're finally willing to give up on this place?" Obviously, no one in the empty fortress could answer this question. Just as this interesting creature filled his water sack and was about to return the way he came, a soft babbling sound suddenly came from the stairs leading to the second floor. A baby. His furry ears instantly determined the source of the sound, but he did not choose to act rashly. This was because he knew that even though the Dalent had left for some unknown reason, the various powerful magical traps and defenses left behind by the enemy still hadn't disappeared. At the very least, they could be maintained for hundreds of years. This was especially true for the huge metal puppet standing in the corridor on the second floor. It could almost take his life in an instant. Should he take the risk and investigate? Or should he obediently take the water sack and return to the tribe? In the end, the curious nature of an intelligent creature triumphed over the fear of death. This cat-like creature that walked upright put down the heavy water sack, and with the help of a rope connected to a hook, easily avoided the metal guards in the corner that flickered with magical halos, and arrived at the leftmost room on the second floor in a few steps. Through the crack in the door, he finally saw a pink baby lying on a clean white experiment table in a laboratory that was soaked in all sorts of creatures. There were a few Dalent's men lying on the ground around it. These ferocious rulers no longer had their usual awe-inspiring might. Their huge heads had exploded, and light purple blood and brain matter flowed all over the ground. Oh my God! No wonder I didn't see a single enemy when I came in. They're all dead. But what's with this baby? He's obviously not one of the Dalent's men. With strong doubts, the cat-like creature strode into the laboratory and gently picked up the baby from the experiment table. When he saw the deep black eyes of the baby, he couldn't help but shudder. With a trembling voice, he exclaimed, "Unbelievable! This is the power of magic. A baby actually possesses such powerful magic. Who are you? Where did you come from?" Yeah. The baby waved his tender hands, trying to pull out the thick beard of this creature. A mischievous little fellow. Looks like you're not in cahoots with those damn Dalent's men. Since that's the case, I'll bring you back to the Elder and see if he's willing to take you in." Having said that, the cat-like creature grabbed a white cloth and wrapped the baby from head to toe, fastening it tightly in front of its chest. Since the entire planet was a large desert, the temperature difference between day and night was huge. Furthermore, it would take a long journey back to the tribe for a few days. If the baby didn't have any protective measures, it would be impossible for him to survive. Apart from that, before he left, he didn't forget to plunder a few magical items from the corpses. He didn't notice that the eyes of the baby in his arms flashed with the light of wisdom from time to time. That was definitely not something a baby could possess. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1258. Those who had never experienced the end of the world would never be able to understand how harsh the environment would become and how difficult it would be to survive on a planet that had lost almost all of its important resources. During the day, they would have to endure the scorching sun and an environment that was over 60 degrees Celsius. At night, they would have to rest in an environment that was over minus 25 degrees Celsius to recover their strength for the arduous journey the next day. Of course, all of these were just the simplest parts. The real threat was the predators with sharp claws and fangs hidden beneath the desert. Under extremely harsh conditions, these ferocious monsters had evolved to have unparalleled hunting abilities. Not only could they easily tear apart tough fur and shells, they could also neutralize the residual toxins in their prey's bodies. Due to the complete collapse of the ecological cycle, the food on this planet was extremely scarce. No life form could afford to be picky about what they could and could not eat. As the best warrior in the tribe, the big catman undoubtedly had an extremely strong sense of danger. He had survived several attacks in a row and had even killed the other party once. He had cut off large amounts of white, tender meat and fed it to the baby in his arms with the water in his water sack. He understood that a normal baby would not have the ability to digest such food and might even be poisoned to death by the toxins in the food. But regrettably, he had no other choice now. He could only hope that the baby could survive these few days and that he would have a sweet meal when he returned to the tribe. But what surprised him was that this seemingly delicate baby had not only not died from the poison, but had become even stronger after eating the food with slight toxins. No matter how the outside environment changed, whether the temperature rapidly rose or fell, there was a faint layer of energy surrounding the baby's body, ensuring that its body temperature would not change too much. Just like that, the big catman finally returned safely to the location of his tribe with an uneasy heart. Just as he stepped into the warning line, a much smaller fellow suddenly popped out half his head and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Hey, Brolin, is that you?" "Nonsense. Of course it's me." The big catman called Brolin raised his arm and waved his hand forcefully. "God bless you. You finally returned safely. How was it? Did you get the water?" The former quickly put away his weapon, left his hiding place, and rushed forward. After all, water was the source of life. There were not many life forms in the universe that could survive without water. Even they, who had evolved for hundreds of years under extreme drought conditions, had only evolved a water storage organ that could store water inside. Even if they did not drink water for a week or two, they would not die of thirst. Brolin patted the huge water sack on his back and nodded with a smile. "Of course. I've collected enough water this time. It should be enough for the tribe to use for at least 2 months. "Wah, what? You filled the whole water skin? Don't tell me you." The slightly shorter catman widened his eyes in surprise and licked his dry lips inadvertently. One had to know that the water sack that looked like the size of a wooden barrel was not an ordinary water sack, but a tool that had been modified by magic. It could fill up a third of the water reservoir in the camp in one go. Under normal circumstances, being able to retrieve a fifth of it in one go and bring it back alive was already considered quite lucky. "That's right. You guessed it right. I went to the magic fortress built by the Dalent people." Brolin nodded and admitted generously. "Damn it. Are you crazy? Those magic traps and steel puppets will take your life. But I came back alive, didn't I? All right, don't be so wishy-washy. Hurry up and pour the water into the reservoir. I still have to see the elders. I have something very important to discuss with them." Brolin did not say anything else and directly stuffed the heavy water sack into his companion's hands. Then, he carried the baby in his arms and walked towards a deep underground cave. After shuttling through the intricate underground tunnels for more than 20 minutes, he finally arrived at a karst cave where 4 elders were sitting around. When the elder in the lead saw him walk in, he immediately raised his head and asked, "How was it? Did you get the water?" "Yes, elder. I got the water. And I also found that the Dalent people in the magic fortress were all dead. The only one who survived was this strange baby. He is obviously not a Dalent person. I have never even seen a similar race before." Brolin hurriedly said everything he knew. At the same time, he untied the sack in front of his chest and placed the naked baby on a table made of the shell of an unknown creature. "A baby?" Another elder's eyes lit up slightly. He stretched out a finger and gently poked the baby's belly. Soon, he shook his head. "Sorry, I can't bear it. There are no records of a similar race in any books. Maybe it's from another world? The Dalent people dominate dozens of worlds." Another elder proposed a hypothesis. "It's possible. How do you think we should deal with this baby? I can feel that he has an extremely powerful magic potential. Maybe we should raise him. When he reaches adulthood, he can provide shelter for our tribe. But he's not one of our people. How can you be sure that he will return our kindness? Don't forget, he's just a baby. A baby is like a blank piece of paper. We just need to instill the idea of protecting the tribe in him. His powerful magic power will become our umbrella. Stop arguing. Same old rules. Let's vote. Those in favor, please raise your hand. After a short debate, the 4 elders finally voted 3-1. They approved the adoption of this strange baby. They even gave the baby a name, Luke, Lucky Luke. At the same time, in the collapsing spiritual world, Gru stood beside the huge tree of chaos and looked at the body that had lost its soul. He smiled bitterly and sighed. Sigh, this lunatic made the same choice. Perhaps this is the blessing of fate. The Genesis era will begin soon. No, the Genesis has already begun. 2 wills, 2 souls, 2 surpassers. They, who have been reborn, will decide the direction of the entire universe. The bespectacled man's voice was filled with unprecedented excitement. Rebirth. For the majority of life, it meant a baptism of memories, a reincarnation from life to death, and then from death to life. However, for Zhang Cheng and Byron, it meant breaking free from the shackles of the material universe and the spiritual world. Chapter 1259. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, more than 10 years had passed. As a baby, the lucky Luke was taken in by the small tribe. Like most children of similar age, he had been staying in a relatively safe underground cave. Usually, he would follow the elders to learn all sorts of knowledge, common sense, and survival skills, or he would follow the warriors to learn battle techniques. In short, in this world where danger lurked everywhere, even underage children did not have much free time to play. They had to race against time and work hard to survive. Normally, when an adult male reached the age of 12, he would accept a challenge called a trial. Without any food or water, he would have to survive for 12 days in the boundless desert outside. Only those who survived would have the qualifications to become a member of the tribe. If he died or gave up halfway, then what awaited the loser was a cruel exile, and he would have to struggle alone to survive. Due to the extreme lack of food and water, the tribe did not allow for members who could not create value to live. In the process of growing up, the young Luke had seen with his own eyes a few children older than him fail the trial in the end. They had to say goodbye to their parents, relatives, and friends with tears in their eyes, and embark on the path of survival alone. But for some reason, he did not resonate with such a cruel scene. Instead, he felt as cold as the bone-chilling wind of the desert night. Obviously, for a child of about 10 years old, such a reaction was definitely not normal. But in the path of Luke's growth, abnormality was the norm. Normal times were pathetically rare. After all, his appearance and appearance were completely different from the other large felines in the tribe that walked upright. He did not have thick fur, sharp claws, teeth, or pupils that glowed with green light. He only had a head of long black hair and the same deep black eyes. Apart from that, he also realized that he was far smarter than the other members of the tribe. No matter what the elders taught him, he could learn it in one go. Even the magic that the elders claimed required special talent to learn, he could copy it perfectly after seeing it once. He was even more powerful than the magic that the professors used. Everything seemed to prove that he never belonged to this place, but came from another place. But what was interesting was that every time he began to think deeply, a voice would suddenly resound in his mind. Go back. Now is not the time. Following that, everything in the surroundings seemed to have fallen into a state of stillness, and it would only return to normal after about 2 to 3 seconds. One had to know that this wasn't happening once or twice, but repeatedly several times. With Luke's clever little brain, it wasn't hard for him to guess that there must be some secret hidden in his body. Perhaps his origin was a huge secret. But unfortunately, when he asked the elders about his background, they always avoided talking about it, repeatedly emphasizing that he was a member of the tribe and would become an indispensable and powerful umbrella for the tribe in the future. An ordinary child might have been fooled by the elders' words, but Luke saw through their lies with a single glance, as well as the fear hidden behind their lies. Needless to say, the elders had taken a fancy to his incomparably terrifying magical talent and had done their best to nurture and train him. As he grew older, the strength that Luke displayed in certain aspects also increased dramatically. When he was 7 years old, he could even kill a dozen giant worms that had rushed into the cave from underground with the help of the few magic books that were recorded in the tribe. Normally speaking, once these behemoths that were more than 50 meters long and had a diameter of 2 meters charged into the narrow terrain of the cave community, it would almost be a tragic massacre. From the elderly to the children, all of them would be devoured by those bloody mouths. After this incident, Luke's status in the tribe rose rapidly, and many people no longer regarded him as an underage child. On the day that he was about to celebrate his 12th birthday, he suddenly received an unsigned letter. The letter was carved on the shell of a desert crustacean and was only the size of a palm. There was only one sentence written on it. After sunset tonight, I will wait for you by the water reservoir. Water reservoir? Luke subconsciously frowned. As one of the two most important places in the entire tribe, the water reservoir could be said to be of the utmost importance. It was also the source of the livelihood of over 100 people in the tribe. Under normal circumstances, there would be at least 6 people taking turns to guard this place to ensure that the water source was absolutely safe. He could not understand why the other party would choose such a place with so many eyes if they wanted to meet secretly. But doubts were just doubts, and he decided to take a look in the end. Ever since he had experienced that battle with more than 10 giant worms, Luke realized that the magical power he possessed was far stronger than he had imagined. There should be nothing around the tribe that could threaten him. With a curious and uneasy heart, he quickly passed through the long and narrow tunnel and arrived beside the bottomless water reservoir after sunset. But the strange thing was that the guards who were supposed to be stationed here had all disappeared, and the surroundings were so quiet that not a single sound could be heard. "Good evening, Luke. You've really come." Just as the boys stopped to look around, a black figure slowly climbed up from the bottom of the water reservoir. "Brolin, it's you." Luke was slightly shocked. The former smiled and nodded. "That's right. It's me. I believe you must be wondering why I suddenly asked you out alone at this time, right? What exactly are you trying to say?" Luke carefully began to retreat. He had heard many legendary stories about this warrior, and understood that this seemingly old fellow in front of him was in fact an out-and-out top hunter. He had even killed the extremely vicious Dalent. When facing such a dangerous opponent, it was very important to maintain a safe distance. He should at least leave about 3 seconds for himself to react. Brolin undoubtedly sensed the vigilance revealed in the boy's eyes. He sighed softly and comforted him. "Relax, child. I'm not your enemy. On the contrary, it was I who brought you back from the magical fortress of the Dalent." "What? Were you the one who brought me back? Tell me, what exactly happened? And who am I?" Luke immediately asked impatiently. Chapter 1260. Self referred to an individual's perception of their own existence. It was the result of an individual's self-evaluation of their social role. If a life form sensed that they were different from the other life forms around them, or even unable to integrate into the social group, then they would have strong doubts about themselves. Then, they would do their best to find the hidden truth. It was very clear that Luke was in such a state right now. Normally, he tried his best to pretend to be normal, using the power he grasped to help the tribe resist the invasion of foreign enemies, thus ensuring the safety of the encampment. But in his heart, he never gave up trying to figure out who he was, where he came from, and why there was always a voice echoing in his mind. Seeing the urgent desire flickering in the boy's black pupils, Brolin smiled bitterly and shook his head. "No, I can't tell you now, unless you agree to a condition of mine." "What condition?" Luke clenched his fists tightly, forcing himself to be calm as he asked. "It's very simple. My daughter Malvina will undergo the trial ceremony the day after tomorrow. I hope you can go with her." Brolin spoke of the condition without hesitation. As the saying went, the hearts of parents in the world were pitiful. As a father, he was undoubtedly very clear that without outside help, his daughter only had a 30% chance of passing the trial. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, after hesitating for a while, he finally decided to ask for help from this boy who he risked his life to bring back 12 years ago. "You mean, you want me to undergo the trial on the same day as her?" Even though he was only 12 years old, the smart Luke immediately realized what the other party wanted him to do. In fact, as early as 7 years old, he had already received the unanimous approval of the elders that he didn't need to participate in the so-called trial. But if he insisted, he believed that the elders wouldn't object. After all, surviving outside for 12 days wasn't much of a challenge for him. At the same time, he could also avoid the gossip of those parents who had lost their children. Brola nodded seriously. "Yes. If she's with you, she'll be very safe. When I see Malvina return safely, I'll tell you everything I saw. But why should I believe that you're not lying for your daughter?" Luke narrowed his eyes and probed. Here, take it. This is something I found beside you. It can prove that I'm not lying." As he spoke, Brolin placed a small piece of sparkling and translucent mysterious crystal that seemed to be filled with some kind of dark blue liquid beside the reservoir. He then turned around and disappeared into the end of the underground passage. As he passed by, Luke suddenly discovered several unconscious guards lying on the ground. Needless to say, these guards were the watchers of the reservoir, and they had lost consciousness for some unknown reason. Carefully picking up this extremely beautiful crystal, Luke couldn't help but shiver. It was as if his entire being, from inside out, from his body to his soul, had produced some kind of intense resonance. At the same time, he vaguely saw an incomparably huge tree through an unknown distance. What the hell is this?" he muttered to himself as he held the dark blue crystal tightly. It was as if a seal deep in his soul had loosened. Just as the seal was about to break out of the cocoon, the voice in his head once again let out a deafening roar. "No, now is not the time. Go back. It's too dangerous for you." In the next second, all the illusions and resonances disappeared, replaced by a cold touch. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Just a little bit more. Who the hell am I?" Luke, who had been interrupted, roared furiously. But in the end, he quickly calmed down. Taking advantage of the fact that the unconscious guards had yet to wake up, he quickly took the crystal and left the reservoir. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. As the first ray of sunlight rose from the horizon in the morning, the solemn, serious, and even slightly desolate trial finally began. As one of the participants, Marvina was already carrying the tools and weapons that her parents had personally prepared for her. She stood near the only exit that led outside. Not only did she not show the slightest bit of hesitation and fear, she instead appeared very excited and expectant. No matter what, she had never had any contact with the outside world. No matter how many warnings she had heard about how dangerous it was outside, she couldn't help but have a strong sense of curiosity. In comparison, the other participant, Luke, was much calmer. He quickly checked all his belongings, especially those precious and easily damaged magical items. After confirming that there were no problems, he said to the elders who had come to send them off, "Please don't worry. We will return safely. Don't be careless. I know that your spellcasting skills have long surpassed mine, but sometimes strength can't completely determine victory or defeat. Luck and experience are also quite important. If something really happens, you have to come back alive no matter what. Do you understand?" An old man with white hair and beard exhorted loudly. "Understood. I will be careful." After saying that, Luke turned his head and looked at the somewhat cute Marvina. "How about it? Are you ready? If you are, we will be on our way." "Huh, no problem. My father is the strongest warrior in the tribe. I won't embarrass him." Marvina raised the corner of her mouth, revealing a few sharp canine teeth. "If that's the case, then let's go." Luke didn't waste any time and was the first to lead the way out of the cave. Stepping on a golden beach under the sunlight, he strode forward and disappeared behind the first sand dune in a short while. Looking at the backs of the two youths, one of the elders asked in an uncertain tone, "Do you really think that letting him leave the camp is a wise choice? You have to know that even if he doesn't participate in the trial, he can still bring an unprecedented sense of security to the tribe." "No, you don't understand. A genius like him shouldn't be imprisoned in the dark underground for his entire life. Although in your eyes, it is a disguised form of protection, he needs space to grow and experience many dangers and tribulations. What we need to do is not to restrict him, but to silently support him from behind. Another elder explained meaningfully. Forget it. Things have already come to this point. There is no use in regretting. Let's wait patiently. After 12 days, fate will give us a clear answer. Yes, after 12 days, we will know whether he is the person we are waiting for to bring about change. If he doesn't come back, shut up. Don't say such discouraging words. He will definitely come back. Chapter 1261. With the golden light emitted by the star, the temperature of the desert began to rise rapidly. In just a few hours, the temperature had risen from minus 40 degrees Celsius. Even naked, I could clearly see the refraction of the air currents. Without a doubt, for most of the creatures that didn't live in such harsh environments, this temperature was unbearable, let alone comfortable. Luke was already feeling a little dizzy when he was less than 10 kilometers away from the tribe's encampment. He had already taken off the thick leather jacket he had worn before leaving and changed into a light, long-sleeved shirt that could block the sunlight. As someone who had learned almost all survival knowledge and common sense, he was very clear that in the wild, he had to prepare 2 sets of clothes in the day and at night. Apart from that, he had also consumed a quarter of the water in his canteen. In other words, he had to find a place to replenish his water before the water he carried with him ran out. Secondly, he had to hunt a usable animal or insect before he felt hungry and weak. Obviously, these 2 conditions were the initial purpose of the trial. It was to ensure that every member of the tribe had a certain level of survival ability. Once they encountered a sudden situation and had to migrate, everyone would be able to contribute their full strength during the journey. In this apocalyptic world where resources were extremely scarce, it was already good enough to struggle and survive. It was said that in some faraway places, there were even intelligent creatures that sold themselves to slave traders in order to have a mouthful of food every day. Feeling the heat from the blinding sunlight shining on his body, Luke sighed slightly. He lifted the sun hat made from an unknown monster's body and asked without turning his head, "We are now quite a distance away from the tribe's encampment. How do you want to spend the next 12 days? Of course, Malvina, who had been following behind him for less than 10 meters, quickly nodded. I heard that if we keep going west, we will reach the nearest town in about 4 days. Why don't we take a look at the town? West? Town? Luke was stunned for a moment, but soon a strange expression appeared on his face. You're not talking about Darazan Town, are you? Yes, it is Darazan Town. I heard that there are a lot of interesting goods there, including food, weapons, merchandise, and even slaves. The cat girl's eyes were filled with excitement, curiosity, and anticipation. She was completely unaware that the small town called Darathon was actually a place where plunderers gathered to sell their stolen goods and slaves. A healthy, well-trained girl like her, who had no experience in dealing with people, was the best target. However, Luke didn't reveal the cruel truth to the other party. Instead, he tacitly approved of the other party's route, because he was also very curious about what the small town that had been described as hell on earth by the elders was like. Just like that, the 2 tried their best to conserve the water they carried with them. In the evening, they killed a Maugu that attempted to launch an attack and collected enough meat as food for the next few days. In this desert where the ambient temperature at noon was more than 50 degrees Celsius, processing food was a simple matter. All he had to do was find a piece of local salt and throw the sliced meat on top of it. It wouldn't be long before the stones that absorbed the heat from the sun would cook all the meat. At the same time, the salt contained in the salt would seep into the meat under the high temperature, providing a small amount of precious salt for the cook. 4 days wasn't a long time, but it wasn't a short time either. Especially for a newbie who had come into contact with the extreme environment and climate of the desert for the first time, it definitely wasn't easy. But with his rich knowledge and calm countermeasures, Luke finally successfully walked through the most dangerous part of the journey and successfully arrived at this small town that was said to be built on top of an underground well. Different from his impression of a town that was densely populated and bustling with commercial activities, Darathon Town looked very desolate from afar. There were no merchants coming in and out, nor were there busy crowds. There were only 2 rows of skeletons nailed to the shelves. Due to being exposed to the sun for a long time, most of the skeletons were only white skeletons left. Greed, evil, decay. Taking a deep breath of the slightly rancid air, Luke didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a strong sense of familiarity, as if he was already used to it. Before they could get close to the entrance, a tall and muscular creature with a lizard-like head suddenly blocked their path and asked with a sinister smile, "Hey, little guy, where did you come from?" We came from the east." Without waiting for Malvina to finish her sentence, Luke beat her to it and answered, "East." The lizard-headed creature stuck out his tongue and licked his lips, his entire body emitting a bloodthirsty aura. Without asking, it was obvious that he was just trying to get information out of them, trying to figure out where these 2 seemingly underage children came from. Generally speaking, a place where children were born meant that there was a small hidden tribe. And a tribe meant that there would be food and water, as well as a large amount of goods that could be sold. Even if there wasn't any of the above, they could still capture enough slaves. Whether it was females that could be used for reproduction or males that could be used as cannon fodder or labor, they could all be sold for a good price in the market. But regrettably, Luke saw through their little trick almost immediately and didn't tell them the right direction. But Malvina obviously didn't understand why they had to lie. Her 2 eyes stared at her companion, as if she was yearning for an explanation. Naughty little thing. You actually lied. Looks like I have to teach you a lesson." The lizard-headed creature obviously wasn't an idiot and immediately realized something from Malvina's reaction. He stretched out his claws and wanted to grab Luke from the ground. After all, he was over 5 meters tall, and his body was covered in light gray scales. He didn't think that a mere child could pose any threat. But in the next second, he paid the price for his ignorance and arrogance. Hand! My hand! The moment his claws touched Luke's collar, a violet flame suddenly appeared out of thin air, continuously burning the area above his wrist. In just a few seconds, the light gray scales showed a charred color, at the same time emitting a rich barbecued meat smell. Chapter 1262. Fortunately, the violet flame didn't last long. It was extinguished in less than half a minute. However, the left hand of the creature with the lizard's head had completely turned into a lump of unknown black substance, turning into dust with a light touch. Shock, alert, fear. All the spectators who saw this scene turned their gazes towards the small figure standing at the entrance of the town. Even though the resources of this planet had been plundered, the remnants were still enough to support a massive magic system. However, compared to the past, it was much more difficult to cast spells, create, and use magical items now. However, what they didn't expect was that a strange-looking child could actually cast such a powerful magical flame. After all, Darazon Town was a place where raiders gathered. No one knew the value of a spellcaster better than them. For a moment, many people's gazes were filled with scrutiny, greed, and desire. But regrettably, the world would never lack fools who overestimated their own abilities, and even more so idiots who did not know their own limits. Especially in this group of raiders with almost no knowledge and culture, the number of people who were completely brainless and only knew how to solve problems with violence was definitely not less than 70%, or even higher. Damned little bastard. You actually dared to destroy my hand. I'll kill you. I'll chop you into minced meat for dinner. Due to the extreme pain and anger, the lizard's head had clearly lost its rationality. It did not understand the meaning of magical power at all. It pulled out the large machete it carried with it and viciously slashed down. Staring at the sharp blade descending from the sky, Luke sighed slightly. His entire body instantly turned into a shadow, allowing the large machete to pass through his body. Just as the lizard's head was dumbfounded, seemingly unable to believe what it saw, Luke's entire body floated up. He reached out a hand and lightly pressed on the lizard's head, spitting out a single word from his mouth. Bang! Instantly, the large lizard's head exploded like a watermelon falling from the sky. Glaring red and white brain matter splattered everywhere, dyeing the golden gravel at the entrance of the town red. After the headless corpse fell straight to the ground, Luke calmly regained his physical form. He bent down and searched the corpse for 2 weapons, as well as a small pouch filled with metal discs of different colors. If he was not mistaken, the latter should be the currency used in the outside world. When he packed up his spoils of war and was about to enter the town through the entrance, a woman with a black eye patch and a valiant temperament suddenly said, "Hey, little brother, do you know who the idiot you just killed is? He's already dead anyway, so it doesn't matter if he knows or not." Luke shrugged nonchalantly. "Ha ha ha, I like your bravery." Unfortunately, although this guy was stupid, the person he was relying on wasn't. Be careful. If you run into any trouble that you can't solve, you can come to me. The woman laughed and turned to walk into a building that looked like a hotel. Trouble? I love trouble the most. Luke muttered to himself before turning around and waving at Malvina, who couldn't keep up with the pace anymore. "Don't just stand there. Follow me. Didn't you want to see this town? Oh my God. You actually killed that strong guy? Hurry up and tell me, how did that violet flame do it? And how did it completely turn the body into nothingness? Did the elders teach you magic?" The girl who came back to her senses was like a chirping sparrow as she circled around Luke and kept asking questions. She didn't notice that when they entered the town, there were at least 3 or 4 people following them from afar. There was no doubt that the 2 of them had been targeted by the raiders of this town, especially Luke, who had shown an impressive ability to cast spells. As long as they could capture him and sell him, they would definitely be able to obtain a huge amount of wealth. They could even find a safe city for the rest of their lives and live out the rest of their lives in peace. Malice was everywhere, and without exception, Luke's sharp senses picked up on it. But he didn't alert the enemy. Instead, he acted as if nothing had happened and brought Malvina to stroll around the market. He even spent some money to have an expensive and luxurious meal in a tavern. Of course, this expensive and luxurious was only relative to the barbecued meat in the wild that didn't have any seasoning. When they walked out, the metal round cake in the bag had shrunk by almost 1/3. Weighing the little money he had left, Luke asked the cat girl with great interest, "Malvina, is there anything in particular you're looking for? We can use the rest of the money to buy it." Can we?" The naive girl blinked her eyes. "No problem. Since the money is useless when we bring it back to the tribe, we might as well spend it all here. Don't forget, including the time we have to return to the city, we only have less than 4 days left to squander," Luke said as he glanced at the sneaky little tails from the corner of his eyes. He didn't know why, but even though this was the first time he came into contact with the evilness of the human heart, he didn't feel any fear. On the contrary, not only was he not afraid, he even felt a little excited and expectant. "Great. Thank you. I saw a long dagger in a market just now, and it looked pretty good." Malvina didn't say anything else and immediately jumped up to hug her companion's neck from behind, rubbing her furry cheeks against him to express her gratitude and happiness. Having grown up in the tribe, she still retained her simple values and didn't know the meaning of politeness. "Then let's go. I hope this money is enough to buy the dagger you want." As he spoke, Luke gently pushed the furry little head away and simply tossed the money pouch to the other party. But just as the 2 were about to turn around and head back to the market, they suddenly realized that a dozen people with bad intentions were surrounding them with weapons in their hands. The guy in the lead threw a heavy war hammer on the ground and roared fiercely, "Kid, were you the one who killed my underling? If you're referring to the idiot whose head exploded at the door, then that's me. What? Are you planning to avenge your underling? My real advice is not to do so, or you'll lose your life." Luke replied expressionlessly. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1263. "Ha ha, this kid is actually threatening me? Did you all hear that?" The leader of the group opened his mouth and laughed out loud in an unrestrained manner. As he laughed, he did not forget to let his subordinates go along with him, trying to create a psychological attack to scare the 2 underage children in front of him. After all, in his impression, children were always easily influenced by their surroundings. Once their hearts were shaken, no matter how powerful they would quickly become timid and eventually lose the courage to face their opponents head-on. Unfortunately, Luke wasn't an ordinary boy. In fact, he had never felt fear or anything like that ever since he could remember. Although he did not know why, the more nervous he was, the clearer and calmer his mind was. Looking at these fellows with ill intentions, his eyes flashed with a dangerous light, and at the same time, his magic power was quickly gathering. Anyone with a slightly sensitive perception would be able to clearly sense that a rather shocking amount of energy had already gathered around his small body. The one-eyed woman who warned Luke before was now standing behind a building not far away, leaning against the wall and asking her companion, "So, do you still doubt my description?" "No, of course not. This is too unbelievable. Who is he? Where did he come from?" "As far as I know, this world does not seem to have any records of his race." The other woman with a sharp chin and a fox-like face held her chin, her entire person exuding a charming aura. One must know that on this planet that had entered the end of the world, most of the intelligent creatures had some animal characteristics. According to the legends of the creation of the world, there were no intelligent creatures in the beginning, only a group of wild beasts driven by primitive desires. But later, a god awakened from the chaos and sprinkled a large number of things called the wisdom fruit. All the wild beasts that swallowed the wisdom fruit quickly began to evolve and finally became what they were now. Generally speaking, the less animal characteristics a race had, the higher the degree of evolution. But a race that completely abandoned animal characteristics was absolutely impossible. "I don't know. I only know that he was with that little girl." As she spoke, the one-eyed woman pointed at Malvina. "A Canty?" The fox-like woman raised her eyebrows in surprise. It was common knowledge that the Canty people were another name for the cat people. They were known for being reclusive and unsociable. They rarely appeared in large cities and were often hidden in the depths of the vast desert. There were advantages and disadvantages to doing so. One of the benefits was that as long as their race did not perish, they could pass down their knowledge and secrets. Similarly, they did not have to worry too much about being attacked, betrayed, or enslaved by other intelligent races. However, there were also many disadvantages. The most typical one was that due to long-term isolation from the outside world, their weapons and equipment were relatively primitive and backward. Furthermore, they were extremely conservative and rarely were they willing to accept new things. The one-eyed woman laughed and teased. "A Canty and a mysterious boy. Don't you think they're a good match?" The fox-faced woman nodded thoughtfully. "That's right. They were indeed very compatible. Perhaps only the Cantans, who adhere to their ancient traditions, can raise such an interesting little fellow. How about it? Do you want to rope them in? That child's magic power is far beyond the limits of his age," the one-eyed woman suggested. "Wait a moment. I want to use my own eyes to see if he has the right to be one of us." With that, the fox-faced woman took out a handful of unknown sand from her pocket and held it in her palm. She opened her mouth and blew lightly. Whoosh! Instantly, every grain of sand spread out at an extremely fast speed, shrouding the entire street within. However, because the grains of sand were too small, most people did not notice them. Only one person, and that was the young Luke, noticed the sand that filled the air. However, after confirming that the sand did not pose any threat to him, he focused his attention on the dozen or so people who came looking for trouble. He calmly asked, "What do you want? What do we want?" "Of course, we want you to compensate for the death of my subordinate." The man in the lead leaned on his warhammer, his eyes shining with undisguised greed. Compensation? Luke seemed to have realized something. His entire body tensed up as he prepared to use force in the next second. "Yes, compensation." The man in the lead nodded matter-of-factly. "I'm a fair man. You killed my subordinate. Either you compensate me with a large sum of money to make up for the loss, or you take his place. Believe me, you will become addicted to this line of work after participating in a few operations. Then, you will fall in love with this line of work from the bottom of your heart." "You mean, you want me to become a raider with you?" Luke pursed his lips and revealed a sarcastic smile. Although the values instilled by the elders did not prohibit killing and raiding, he was instinctively disgusted by this line of work that did not produce anything and only knew how to destroy and take. So, you are prepared to compensate me with a large sum of money? The man in the lead suddenly took a step forward, tightly gripping the heavy war hammer in his hand and assuming a threatening posture. He knew that these two children did not have anything valuable on them. The only thing of value was the two children themselves. No, I plan to use your lives as compensation. If you take your subordinates and leave immediately, then you and your subordinates will not die. As soon as he finished speaking, Luke stretched out his right index finger and pointed in the air in front of everyone. Instantly, an illusory image that looked like a lock mysteriously appeared on the chest of every one of the ill-intentioned fellows. It was so heavy that they knelt on the ground with a thump, their ears filled with the sound of their own heartbeats. Thump, thump, thump. The faster, the faster. The faster, the faster. Under this strong and powerful heartbeat, everyone's skin began to congeal with blood, revealing a strange purplish-red color. Even their eyeballs were no exception. The man in the lead felt as if his body was filled with endless power. He suddenly raised his war hammer and roared loudly. Damn brat, since you don't appreciate it, then go to hell. Sorry, you have made the wrong choice. In the face of the heavy war hammer falling from the sky, Luke did not panic in the slightest. He directly detonated this terrifying magic. In less than a second, the illusory image of the lock on his chest exploded from the inside. Large amounts of blood spurted out, dyeing the ground black and red. Chapter 1264. How could this be? Along with the intense pain, the leader lowered his head and realized that his exposed heart had been completely shattered. It was like a rag dangling beside the bloody wound. But soon, the large amount of blood loss made him feel weak like never before. Finally, he blacked out and fell to the ground, taking his last breath. Until his death, he still didn't understand how that lock-like phantom controlled the blood flow in his veins, and how it crushed his heart under the immense pressure. Looking at the bloody scene caused by his magic, Luke's eyes flashed with a strange light. Because at this moment, not only did he not feel uncomfortable, nauseous, but he was filled with a strong desire. It was as if killing a living being could bring him some kind of power that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Luke, you killed all of them? Malvina's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe what she saw. It was one thing to kill the monsters that invaded the tribe's territory, but it was another thing to kill a group of intelligent people. Why not? As you can see, they forced me to do this. Luke shrugged nonchalantly. He could feel that when these people died, his control over magic energy had increased. But Malvina obviously felt that something was wrong, but she didn't know how to express it. She stuttered for a long time and couldn't finish a sentence. All right, no buts. Hurry up and search the bodies. Then we'll finish shopping and leave this place as soon as possible. After saying that, Luke glanced at the people around him who were either in awe or carefully hiding themselves. He suddenly had a bad premonition. To be precise, he realized that the reaction of the town's residents was too strange. Normally, when an outsider like him had a conflict with the local forces, there would be an organization responsible for maintaining order that would step forward to mediate or punish the party that violated the rules. Otherwise, Darazan town would have fallen into chaos, and there wouldn't be such a prosperous market in goods. Without a doubt, either the organization responsible for maintaining order had more important things to do and didn't have time to care about a small conflict between a dozen people, or the people with real power and influence were hiding in the background, throwing these clowns out as chess pieces to test the waters. The possibility of the latter was much higher than the former, and it was more in line with this cruel apocalyptic world. However, just as Luke was about to bring his spoils to the market to sell them and buy some valuable items before returning, a familiar figure suddenly blocked his path. Hey, little brother, we meet again. The woman with the eye mask took the initiative to greet him. It's you. Luke took 2 steps back warily. This was because he could smell the thick scent of blood that was inadvertently emitted from the other party's body. She was obviously not an ordinary woman in the tribe who was responsible for cooking, cleaning, raising livestock, and taking care of children. Instead, she was a female demon who had crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The woman with the eye patch seemed to have realized this as well. She smiled and nodded. That's right. I have to admit that the spell you just cast was a little beyond my expectations. How about it? Are you interested in joining my team and going out to see the wider world? Your team? Luke immediately frowned. A wider world? Malvina showed an expectant expression. Appreciating the different reactions of the two little guys, the woman with the eye patch had a playful look in her eyes. She then calmly explained, Yes. As you can see, I'm the leader of a small mercenary team. My main job is to provide protection for those rich merchants. Apart from that, I occasionally join in the chaos and conflicts of some regions. Whoever pays the most money will kill the enemy for them. I've been to many places. I've seen majestic and magnificent cities, and I've also seen the last forest in this world. I promise that as long as you join, you'll definitely enjoy many beautiful sceneries that you've never seen before. Her words were full of strong temptation, especially for the children who had just left home and came into contact with the outside world. We'll join. We refuse. Malvina and Luke gave the opposite answer at almost the same time. Oh, then do you want to join or refuse? The woman with the eye patch raised the corner of her mouth and asked with a faint smile. Why will we refuse? Malvina stared into her classmate's eyes and asked in a low voice. Because it's too dangerous. We don't understand her at all. We can't be sure if every word she says is true or false. Remember, the outside world is full of deceit, lies, and betrayals. Moreover, this is only a trial. I have to bring you back safely. Luke explained with a serious face. After all, the reason why he came out with the girl was to figure out his background. Before he got an accurate answer, the outside world didn't have much attraction for him. No, I don't want to complete the trial under your protection. What's the difference between this and cheating? I want to rely on my own strength to explore the wider world until I become a tribal warrior like my father. Malvina refused without hesitation. She was so determined that before Luke could react, she had already run behind the one-eyed woman. Looks like this little girl has made her decision. Now you're the only one left. The woman stroked the girl's furry head and couldn't hide the proud expression on her face. It was obvious that she had already seen through the relationship between the two. It was the boy protecting the girl. So as long as she could deal with the naive girl, the boy naturally wouldn't be able to escape from her hands. When violence and threats were no longer effective, some conciliatory tricks would often produce unexpected results. Come back. Malvina, come back with me. Luke didn't expect that the biggest obstacle to completing this mission wouldn't come from the enemy, but from the person being protected herself. With his mature and steady personality, he didn't expect the outside world to be so attractive to a girl who had been raised in captivity for 12 years. He also didn't expect that the other party would avoid him and choose to attack Malvina, who was easily hooked. Wonderful book house.